Welcome to the Department of Motor Vehicles Autonomous Vehicle Public Workshop. I'm Bernard Soriano, the Autonomous Vehicles Project co-sponsor, and to my left is Brian Sibley, the DMV's Chief Counsel. And to his left is Stephanie Doherty, the other Autonomous Vehicles Project co-sponsor. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Unfortunately, we do not have Wi-Fi in this room, so we apologize for that inconvenience. And then the restrooms, should you need them, are out the back door and to the right. This is a workshop, and we plan on going until noon. We'll take a break for lunch from noon till 1. And then if needed, we'll take an afternoon break at 2:15 and start again at 2:30. This is a workshop, and we want this to be interactive because we really value the feedback that you will be providing. As Brian mentioned, in the back of the room, the sound system may not be as effective, and so there's some seats in the front. If you would like to fill up the front seats, you may be able to hear much better. And then when you speak, we have a podium to my left, and if you want to speak, we'd ask that you line up on the wall along to my left. And when you come up to the microphone, please introduce yourself. We have a court reporter who will be recording the proceedings. Tell us where you are from, and we'll get it on the record. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Sibley, who'll get us started.
I'd like to welcome you to our workshop for the regulations being developed pursuant to California Vehicle Code Section 38750 for the deployment of autonomous vehicles on public streets in California. By now, most of you are pretty familiar with the subject matter of today's workshop, but I think a brief introduction is necessary for those who do not know the background of DMV's involvement in regulating autonomous technology. Senate Bill 1298 from 2012 enacted Vehicle Code Section 38750, which requires the DMV to adopt regulations setting vehicle equipment requirements, performance standards, safety certifications, and other matters that the department concludes are necessary for the safe operation of autonomous vehicles on public roads, with or without the presence of a driver inside the vehicle. DMV divided that task into two phases. The first, the testing regulations, were approved in May 2014 and became effective September 2014. Our workshop today concerns the second phase, the deployment regulations. Vehicle Code Section 38750 specifies that autonomous vehicles shall not be deployed on public roads until the department approves a manufacturer's application pursuant to the regulations adopted for that purpose, and it requires that application contain at a minimum certifications by the manufacturer that the vehicles have a mechanism to engage and disengage the technology that is easily accessible to the operator. There is a visual indicator inside the vehicle that indicates when the technology is engaged. There is a system to safely alert the operator when there is a failure of the technology, and the vehicle either allows the operator to take manual control through the use of the brake, accelerator pedal, or steering wheel, or if the operator does not or cannot take control, the vehicle must be capable of coming to a complete stop. The technology must meet federal motor vehicle safety standards for autonomous technology, and it must not make inoperative any motor vehicle safety standard. There must be a device to record autonomous technology sensor data prior to a collision. The technology, there has to be a certification that the technology has been tested on public roads under the testing standards specified in the department's testing regulations. And finally, the manufacturer has in place $5 million in financial responsibility. In addition to those mandatory certifications, the statute, in 4 distinct places, stresses safety by requiring that the regulations shall include testing, equipment, performance standards, and additional requirements that the department concludes are necessary to ensure the safe operation of autonomous vehicles on public roads. This theme of safety is echoed in NHTSA's recent 2015 update to the 2013 preliminary statement of policy concerning automated vehicles. That statement says, essential to the safe deployment of such vehicles is a rigorous testing regime that provides sufficient data to determine safety performance and help policymakers at all levels make informed decisions about deployment. And as stated further in that update, the governing principle should be that technologies with proven, data-supported benefits that would make roads safe should be encouraged. This has been the DMV's goal in drafting these regulations, to ensure that technologies that have been tested and have data-supported proof that they are safe for operation on public roads are allowed to deploy in California. The regulations we are discussing today will establish the requirements that manufacturers must meet to obtain a permit from the department for the deployment of autonomous vehicles to the general public. Given the emerging nature of autonomous technology, DMV's development of the draft regulations discussed today raises complex questions on issues ranging from vehicle safety to certification approaches, operator responsibilities, licensing and registration requirements, privacy, and cybersecurity. At the last public workshop, which was held exactly almost a year ago, the DMV sought input from manufacturers, research and academic entities, consumer advocacy organizations, and other stakeholders. We were seeking specific input on the standards the department should use to evaluate the certifications that are required by the Vehicle Code. We opened that workshop with a general question on what standards a manufacturer uses when making the decision that a vehicle is safe for public deployment. We heard things like manufacturers apply a variety of functional safety analyses and processes to certify to themselves how a vehicle functions once it is deployed, and that the manufacturers view this as proprietary. We heard that standards certifying safety are internal to each manufacturer. Manufacturers use the functional safety process to look at how a vehicle behaves, and they do a structured testing to challenge the software and develop confidence in the vehicle's capabilities. We also heard there are specific driving scenarios being tested by OEMs, and we don't necessarily need a third party to verify safety. DMV should just make manufacturers demonstrate that the vehicle can operate in the scenarios intended by the manufacturers. DMV shouldn't mandate any particular functional safety standard. Manufacturers should self-certify in their application that they've conducted a functional safety analysis. We heard that DMV is not in the best position to evaluate the safety of any product, that operators and owners should be made aware of the limitations of a vehicle's capabilities, that the regulation should be performance-based. The DMV should make sure the vehicles operate as represented by a manufacturer. We heard that DMV can't believe in self-certification. It must rely on third-party testing. We heard just the opposite. DMV should not rely on third-party testing because the engineer working on the system knows the systems better than anyone. We studied these comments and we took them into consideration when writing these draft regulations. You will see that for many of these concepts have been adopted and included in the draft regulations, which goes to show you the value of having sessions like this. A few weeks ago, we sent out the agenda for today's workshop, and we have additional copies that are located in the back of the room on the right, if you haven't already picked one up. The workshop is being recorded and will be available on our website in a few days. It's also being transcribed. So for the benefit of those viewing the video once it's posted on our website, and for our court reporter, when you come forward to speak, please speak into the microphone, state your name so that we can get it down for the record, and please make sure that you speak clearly, slowly, and loud enough so that everyone in the room can hear your comments. This is a working session to discuss the draft regulations. As you can see from our outline, our objective today is to receive substantive input regarding the testing and certification of vehicle safety to facilitate the development of post-testing deployment regulations. We want to have participatory discussions on certifications by manufacturers that autonomous vehicles can be operated safely on public streets and by the general public, and how the DMV will be able to determine the validity of those certifications in order to approve a manufacturer's application for the post-testing deployment of autonomous vehicles. I should point out this is part of the regulation adoption process, but it is not a substitution for the participation in what will be our formal rulemaking proceeding. Once we are ready to begin the formal rulemaking proceeding, we will publish the text of those proposed regulations and we'll do a 45-day notice period. We will have additional hearings where you can participate by providing both written and oral comments on the regulations. So with that, I'm just going to start off on the first item on our workshop agenda, which is under Roman numeral 2, license and driver required in the vehicle. Exclusions of the autonomous vehicles capable of operating without the presence of a driver in the vehicle, and the manufacturer's driver operation training plan. I'd like anyone who would like to comment on those sections of the regulations or those provisions to come forward now to the microphone that is on my left to be heard. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't know I'd be first. This is kind of intimidating. My name is Paula Margison, and I'm the director of the Dale McIntosh Center for the Disabled in Orange County. And I'm also probably the 10th generation of blind people in my family. We actually had 5 generations living at one time. And so I may not personally reap the benefits of my own testimony, but I'm thinking my grandchildren may, and they're both blind. So, having the ability to operate a vehicle autonomously is really an integral part of our society. Young people get their driver's license at 16, and that is their entree to adulthood. And then as we age, if we lose our license, then sometimes that's people view that as the beginning of the end of their lives because they can't be autonomous and independent and get where they want to go. But for people with disabilities, that's kind of our reality. So I'm thinking that the requirement of a driver's license is kind of short-sighted, if you don't mind me saying that, because it takes away some of the incentive of developing a self-driving car, because if it's not truly self-driving and it requires someone present who has a license, then that kind of defeats the purpose in my mind. I am a real proponent of safety, so I understand your concern for that. But truthfully, I've ridden with so many drivers human drivers who have road rage, who look at their cell phones, and I'd almost rather be in a driverless car. So I believe that the standards could be such that perhaps people who operate one of these cars would need to have some form of identification and that kind of thing, but to require them to have a license is counterproductive to the whole notion, in my mind, of a self-driving car. And it really does limit then the participation by a vast majority of the disability population who long for this advancement in technology, who long for the freedom for once in their lives to be able to get where they want to go on their own without, being dependent on someone else to take them there. So I was thinking, I've lived a long time and I've seen the development of a lot of technology, everything from microwaves to cell phones to even a 3D printer. And I feel like this, if you would have told me 20 years ago that there'd be a device that I could say, take me where I want to go, and it would tell me step-by-step directions how to get there, I would have thought you were so sci-fi. But, everybody uses GPSs now. Even I do, and, to tell the drivers where to take me. So things are possible. And I guess what I want to say to you is please don't limit the possible. Because, yes, it will require standards, and we need to be very mindful of safety, absolutely. But just to say that it's not possible, that's not true. I believe it is. And so that would shut the door on a lot of people with disabilities. We would end up, still at the bus stop or even worse, stranded at home. So please don't limit the possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for having us. I don't think anyone was more excited.
Would you mind stating your name? And
Oh, my name's, sorry about that. My name's Jose, and I'm also from the Dell McIntosh Center. I don't think anyone was more excited about self-driven cars than people with disabilities. Once we heard about this movement going on, everyone was really excited about it. Everyone, the current transportation system that people with disabilities go through right now, it's not the best. We are very limited as far as where we want to go. We have to plan our days, stay ahead, just so we could get to point A, then to point B. Well, when we heard about the driverless car that could take you anywhere, the whole disability community who can't acquire licenses was very excited because that gives us a new independence. Now we could go wherever we want at the time we want. So when we heard about the autonomous car, everyone was excited, especially the disability community. But then we were saddened when the DMV regulations came out requiring a license. The reason why we're in this limitation is because we can't acquire a license due to our disability. Well, this was our one good chance to have independence. And I do see that you do want to make regulations, but that's at a later point. And I think we need this sooner rather than later. So if you could just look into the regulations and take people with disabilities in mind who can acquire a license and who this would mean a greater independence and a greater freedom. And I think it's a step forward for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Soto. I work for Communities Actively Living, Independent, and Free. One of my biggest challenges is finding reliable transportation. Now, I used to drive myself before I became paralyzed 10 years ago, and I remember the freedom I had, not having to rely on other people and having to just have my own independent life on my own schedule, not on someone else's. And I do not want to underestimate, I don't think any of us want to underestimate the technology, the advances of technology. By the time the cars actually get on the road, I don't think we really need to have the person behind the wheel, you might say, to have a driver's license. I understand your need for safety, but maybe someone in the vehicle, that could take over would be sufficient. Or by then, when the technology actually gets on the road, voice-activated technology is really big right now, and it'll be even better as the years go by. So people like me with significant disabilities rely heavily on technology, more so than other people. So that's why it is so important to me and my community. Please don't leave us on the curb. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Good morning.
My name is Gina Garcia. I'm an advocate here at the Independent Living Center in LA. I'm a person with a disability as well as a mom.
Hello, my name is Dina Garcia. I am an advocate for Communities Actively Living, Independent, and Free. I am also a mom.
As an advocate and a person with a disability, I advocate for the rights of people with disabilities.
As an advocate, I advocate for people with disabilities. Oh, and a person with a physical disability. I advocate for people with disabilities. I think that's what you said. Sorry.
I understand the need for safety, and the self-driving cars are such a huge advancement in our society. We've come a long way.
I understand the need for safety.
And the Google technology.
And the Google technology that it was coming a long way.
As the advocate and the person with the disability, I advocate for independence on a daily basis.
As an advocate and someone with a disability, I advocate for independence every day.
As a mom, I have to arrange for transportation for myself as well as my son to get him where he needs to go.
As a mom, I have to arrange for transportation for my son and myself every single day so that we can get to go where we need to go.
I understand the need for safety, but I've driven with lots and lots of people my time that should not have a driver's license in the first place.
Can you repeat that?
Just
repeat it to me and I'll, okay.
As
As a person with a disability,
I ride with a lot
I ride with a lot of drivers that
that
shouldn't even have their driver's license.
With the technology coming, please don't leave the rest of us in the dark. Give us our independence.
Please don't leave us in the dark. Give us our independence. Is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Carrie Madden, and I'm with CalLife. And what I would like to say today is that I think the time is about here for self-driving cars that everybody could use. And it's very frustrating when I read the topic, and I didn't really see anything related for people with disabilities. Many of us require our high technology devices already. I mean, we could talk to our phones, our tablets, our computers, and we're just fine with the technology. And so many in the disabled community already utilize those items. So to now bring it onto cars, this is excellent. This is something we can use. Many of us are college educated. We can speak clearly. We can communicate just fine with the technology. But when I was reading the paperwork regarding the cars, I was a bit frustrated because I didn't see anything related to our community. We don't want to be left behind. We're so dependent on other people, and this will give us our total freedom. The time is about here, and we are so excited, but we're just so worried that we'll be left behind. The doors will close once again, and we'll have to fight for it again. So that's what we're here to ask for. Keep us in mind. Understand, we want safety. We don't want accidents. You know, accidents will happen, but we want to really make sure that that isn't a strong likelihood. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Carrie, I have a question. We want to get there, but we have to balance the issue of safety as well. And so the concept of having a person in the vehicle for a limited period of time, at, say, the beginning of the introduction, how do you feel about that?
You mean have a trial with people with disabilities trying out the technology, or just anybody in particular?
About a licensed driver, a requirement of a licensed driver in the vehicle for a small period of time at the beginning of the deployment.
If it's kind of like a training period? Are you
Something
suggesting
like
like that? A training period would be fine. You know, I'm not, I am a licensed driver. Okay, I just don't have a vehicle right now, but I am. And I understand the value of having that license and the training that comes along with it. And I wouldn't be against people with disabilities, all kinds of disabilities, being considered for maybe a special license for this new technology so that we can show the state that we are capable of driving safely. So that I would consider fair, you know. I'm not asking for anything different from anybody else, but just an accommodation to reach that goal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I have a written testimony for.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good morning.
Mr. Simpson.
I'm John Simpson. I am Privacy Project Director for Consumer Watchdog, and I look forward to the day that self-driving technology can, in fact, offer great freedoms and opportunities to disabled people. But I also think that we are passing a regulation for the current situation. And what I think is that you've gotten it exactly right. You've put in safety first. And I think it's absolutely essential at this point that there be a licensed human driver behind a steering wheel capable of taking over control when necessary. I don't base that on just sort of random thoughts. I base that, in fact, on the reports that were required to be filed under the testing regulations by the people who are testing the vehicles right now. There were 7 such companies. I focus on Google because they had the most vehicles out there. They drove the most miles, 245,000 miles, something like that. And their disengagement reports show that they had to disengage the robot technology 341 times. That's about an average of 22 times a month. And if they're not driving every day of the week, that might be just, daily. And it was 272 times that the technology basically said, whoop, can't handle it. We need to give it to you, driver. 69 times it was
Can you make sure you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. 69 times it was the driver who was distressed enough that he or she decided to jump in and intervene. Now, I do have a little chart that I bring along that sort of shows the examples of the kinds of things, real road situations that cannot be handled by these vehicles. And they range from things like simple software failures, hardware failures, an inability to anticipate other dangerous actions by other vehicles and cyclists, not able to handle bad weather, not able to accurately judge what a pedestrian's going to do, misunderstanding, misperceiving overhanging branches and responding inappropriately. These are real road situations that so far haven't been solved. I look forward to the day in the future, perhaps, when they will be solved. But until they are, I think it's imperative that you put safety first, and you're doing that. And I hope you will not fall subject to the sort of things that Google said in Sacramento, which essentially was, if you pass this regulation, we're gonna pick up our toys and drive them in another state. I mean, that's not working with sensible regulations. We're all for safety. We profess to be for safety. You should stick by your guns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Good morning, and thank you very much for hosting today's hearing. Today's workshop. My name is Amitai Binan, and I represent Securing America's Future Energy, SAFE, which is a nonpartisan advocacy organization focused on the economic and national security implications posed by America's severe dependence on oil, especially to fuel the transportation sector. SAFE is led by retired 4-star military officials and prominent business leaders, and has worked for a decade to improve U.S. energy security by promoting fuel efficiency and fuel diversity, including the accelerated deployment of electric vehicles. Autonomous vehicles represent enormous opportunity to reduce energy consumption and encourage fuel diversity and vehicle electrification. To this end, SAFE has formed its Autonomous Vehicle Task Force, convening some of the nation's leading thinkers on autonomous vehicle technology, policy, and economics. You will hear from 2 of them today, Rut Bridges and Peter Shannon. In specific response to the draft regulations, we are concerned that the provision that a licensed driver must be present at all times in an autonomous vehicle obviates many of the potential gains that autonomous vehicles can bring, including increased mobility for the disabled, including many of the 2.6 million disabled Californians, some of which you've heard from so eloquently this morning, economic gains from cheaper and more productive transportation, which has the potential to give lower-income Americans access to cheap and reliable transportation that will enable economic mobility, and perhaps serious gains in terms of energy security and energy savings. We are also concerned about some of the other regulations, including the outlined certification process, restrictions on provisional permits, and vagueness as to the safety standards by which autonomous vehicles will be judged. We think that this may create unnecessary roadblocks for the development of future technologies and business models before we know the full potential of driverless technology. All of these may seriously delay the implementation of autonomous vehicles and stifle innovation both in California and across the U.S. We share your paramount concern with safety. However, we cannot wait for autonomous vehicles to be perfect, as perfection cannot be the standard in today's far from perfect world. The data shows that of the 6 million accidents that occur on U.S. roads every year, 94% are caused by human error and could be sharply reduced and perhaps even mostly eliminated by driverless vehicles. We recommend that the DMV measure safety against the reality of our roads today, where nearly 100 Americans die every day, a number which increased sharply in early 2015. Countries like Singapore and the UK are in the process of testing level 4 autonomous vehicles, something that would not be possible under the California's proposed regulations. So we look forward to serving as a resource for the DMV. We really thank you for opening up the process, and we look forward to playing a role in serving as a resource to you. And we also look forward to working with the groups that are represented here today and are impacted by these regulations. You will hear more from my colleagues today, and we look forward to submitting specific formal recommendations during the public comment period. And finally, just to reiterate, we urge that any regulations take into account the potential for autonomous vehicles to improve on the status quo for safety, mobility access, energy consumption, and economic transformation.
Before you step away, one of the issues that we've struggled with as we've tried to, basically foster along the development of the technology here in California, and to get to that point where the vehicles can be deployed publicly, is what the certification standards should be. And you mentioned in your comment that you thought in the regulation that it was vague on the certification standards. Do you have some specific suggestions that you'd like to make to us?
I think we're going to hold off on specific recommendations until we can collect input from a broad range of stakeholders. However, I wanted to emphasize the principle that any specific process has the potential, the process as outlined has the potential to create a status quo and entrench interests, which will be very difficult to dislodge at a future date. And I would apply the same advice for the idea that perhaps we can keep the idea that you'll have a provision not that requires a licensed driver, but perhaps remove it at a later date. Any step today creates a status quo and becomes that much more difficult to dislodge. Therefore, I think it's critically important to make sure we get it right the first time around.
I would encourage haste with that, because we can't. There will be no permits issued that would allow the public deployment of the technology until we come up with the regulations. And so the reason why I asked you the question is if you have some suggestions, that can be a part of the process, and we can get to that end goal a lot faster, and have the technology that some of our earlier speakers were talking about that provide the mobility and the access. So the faster we can get the regulations done, the faster we can see the testing of the technology continue and the introduction of it on a general public basis.
Sure. No, thank you. And
Thank you.
Yeah, I understand that this has been a very difficult and long process for the DMV, and I understand that this is not easy. I thank you for all your efforts so far, and we will be in touch with you shortly.
I do have a question. You mentioned there will be two others of your colleagues that will be commenting, and you also made reference to level 4 testing. I assume you meant NHTSA level 4 testing.
Yeah, so this will be NHTSA level 4, completely driverless vehicles.
Right. We would really encourage you to provide any input you would have regarding the concerns that your organization might have with regard to level 4 testing, because we very much would like to move forward with something of that nature as well. So if you give us your thoughts, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Mirish. I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Beverly Hills. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Good morning.
Morning. Further to a letter which I sent to the department last month, I would like to briefly address the larger policy considerations surrounding automated vehicles. We clearly support safety regulations. However, sensible regulations need to allow for development and real-world testing, including allowing for pilot programs to let municipalities and regions take advantage of the technology for the benefit of the public and to increase our residents' quality of life. The technology has the potential not only to make roads safer, but also to use roads more efficiently. And yes, within public transportation applications, such as what I proposed last June in the Los Angeles Business Journal. Anything that has the potential to help reduce our traffic misery in Southern California, but also in other parts of the state as well, needs to be taken seriously and fast-tracked. We're in the process currently of working through policy considerations to allow Beverly Hills to develop an on-demand municipal automated shuttle system with the nifty acronym MASS. not only to solve the first last mile challenges presented by the advent of the subway, which is coming to our city within the next few years, but it will also, more importantly perhaps, take cars off the streets. And we would like to consider being part of a pilot program which would, on demand, take people from point A to point B, first within our city, but then with an eye to regional cooperation and expansion to other mass transportation applications. There's talk of a new transit tax in LA County, which would probably mostly be focused on rail and what the LA Times described as shiny new things. Well, I think we need to take advantage of the automated vehicle technology, which in and of itself takes advantage of an existing infrastructure of streets, which we've made tremendous investments in for the past decades. And I do think that that perhaps has more potential, in fact a lot more potential than Metro and some other transit advocates are giving it credit for. And so let's be safe, let's work on developing regulations that ensure safety, but please let's not waste time and let's not create unnecessary red tape. There's so much potential to this. We're looking at it, and there, as said, from a municipal transit perspective, and not only are there safety upsides, but there are also, as said, upsides in taking cars off streets, which would be a tremendous thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Vanetta Davis, Venetta, and I am an advocate with the Service Center for Independent Life in Claremont, California, and I am a person living with blindness. I'm new to working in advocacy position, and so I'm just gonna kind of share my heart right now. What having this mode of transportation means to me and others living with a difference like me. For example, this morning alone, I'm here alone right now. I was supposed to be here with a group of people, and they are trying to find alternate forms of transportation right now because the train that they were supposed to take, the train before it, had an accident, so that they were limited to how far they could go on the train, and they had to find alternate forms of transportation, and they're still trying to get here. With this vehicle, they would have been able to come on their own. Even still, today my day is now limited to where I can go and what I can do with the changes that are going on. I had a friend call me this morning and tell me that she was going to the hospital. I can't go see her or visit her because I'm reduced to the reservation that I made yesterday to get here and get back to where I'm going. And then I have a doctor's appointment later that got changed to an hour later, that I now can't do anything else with my time because of the reservation for the transportation mode that I made, and I'll just have to sit there and wait. With the Google car, I could alternate what I'm doing throughout the day as my day is progressing and changing. I get the standards of safety that are of concern, and I appreciate those with the highest regard. But what I'm asking is that you not dismiss or eliminate those living with the difference from being able to participate in having a vehicle like this. My family begs me on a regular basis not to use buses or take trains because I may have to cross the street somewhere because of the epidemic we have here in Southern California of hit and run driving. And these are people who are sighted and operating vehicles all on their own. So with the safety that could come from having an autonomous car, that would eliminate a problem on both ends. I could transport myself and be inside a vehicle and not at the curb, risking my life with another driver who is operating their own vehicle. Just please don't dismiss us any longer and eliminate us from what's out there and what's available to everyone else. We're not asking for additional privileges. We just want to be treated fairly and not dismissed for having a difference in life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And good morning to everybody in the room. My name is Peter Benavides, and currently I serve as the President and Chief Executive Officer for Blindness Support Services, which is a private nonprofit organization in Riverside, California. I'm going to first ditto what my colleagues in the field of disability have indicated and talked about. I believe that inclusion in all aspects of society on behalf of people with disabilities should be granted to all of us to participate in work and play in our political structure. I wish we all had a crystal ball so we could take a peek at and take a look at 40 years from now. How would California look in our roads and highways? Technology, as we all know, has made tremendous strides. I mean, I could run a corporation without looking at a computer screen. 40 years ago, that was not possible. I believe in safety. As a transit-dependent individual, and what I mean by that, if I wanted to go somewhere to work, to play, doctor's office, I'm dependent on a system that is provided here in California that allows people who are transit-dependent to get where they want to go. The frustrating part is that it could take 3 to 4 times as long as it would if I was able to operate a motor vehicle. That's our reality today. I do not believe that it will be our reality in the future. I realize your job is tough, putting together regulations to guard upon safety, efficiency, and the like. But what is exciting about these times is these vehicles, through the miracle of technology, are going to be able to drive themselves and the passengers in the car to Dodger Stadium, to the library, to City Hall, to a park, to the beach. In looking at the future without a crystal ball, one could conclude that there will be less traffic accidents, less fatalities in our state's highways, compared to what we know today. Am I in favor of pilot programs allowing municipalities the right to institute such? Not sure yet. I know your job is tough, but it is your job. And we're here to provide a piece of information for you to consider as you move forward with your recommendations, decisions as it relates to regulations. When we learned about the Google car at our office about 3 or 4 years ago, the excitement that it created in the room was unprecedented. There's a few things, and I'll conclude, with being visual impaired that is very frustrating to deal with. One is driving. One is being able to sit in the backyard of your home with a newspaper and read it independently without third-party assistance. And the other is recognizing body language and facial expressions. We are not able to obtain information as our sighted counterparts. But these are indeed exciting times. And we look forward to the day where all individuals, I guess the only regulation I would put down would be 18 and over, would be able to sit in a autonomous vehicle and get where they want to go. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Hand. I am the Transportation Technology Strategist through a fellowship with the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. So I've been looking at public policy and pilot opportunities for cities to take on when it comes to autonomous vehicles, and also looking through the lens of shared use mobility and the opportunities we have to improve user experience when it comes to mobility. Mobility being kind of the underlying way for us to achieve our city-state goals towards the environment, towards economic development, and equity. So I think it's a really critical issue, and I've been looking quite closely at this for the last few months, and so thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. The concern that I have regarding the requirement of a licensed driver is that it takes out of consideration the fact that this technology is often a lot smarter than we as humans are. 9 out of 10 human drivers think that they're above average, and I'm pretty sure that's statistically impossible. So, and I will put it on the record that I would probably not be an above average driver on the best of times, but it certainly makes you think a lot when you put 2 kids in the back seat and a car seat as to how others are driving around you. And I think the requirement to include a licensed driver in these vehicles makes it impossible for us to push the innovation as far and as fast as we would like to see, because most of that innovation has already started on the private sector side and not been driven through government. But we are challenged on the government side to address the change in technology and the innovation and the pace of this change, because we build our regulations based on what we know and the status quo that we're comfortable with. And so I think this rule is somewhat stuck in the way that we understand how we move and how we use vehicles to get around. I would encourage considering, similar to what the city of Beverly Hills is looking at, a model that looks at shared use. And how can we apply autonomous vehicle technology to move more people around more efficiently and safely? Because we know that while you couldn't possibly account for every single factor in our built environment and human interactions around our vehicles through algorithms, we know that these vehicles do tend to be much safer and not distracted. And I think the concern that I have is that by having an operator in the car that may have kind of given over some of the control of a vehicle, the time it takes for us to come back into control, to put our cell phone down, to take ownership over driving that vehicle itself, is perhaps too long for us to really accommodate in a safe way. So I think that gap actually causes more risk than it does in terms of solving the problem of more than 33,000 deaths on the roadways every year. So I think when we think about kind of the trade-offs of safety, having a vehicle that will most likely follow the rules of the road, most likely stop in any conflict situation, unlike a human driver, I think it far outweighs the costs of kind of that the safety. So I think that's something we need to consider when we balance that. And I think that it's really challenging now to set out. I think California has been a leader and trying to devise some rules and regulations. I think it was the federal government that put it on the states to basically figure this out. I think when it comes to the standardization of these requirements, that we need to look as kind of universally across this country as best as possible to make it a venture that we want to see the private sector take on full force. I think we've started to see the manufacturers move towards this, but without kind of creating an open playing field and leveling it to enable technology to take us to this next generation, we're going to miss this opportunity. And ultimately, I have high hopes for autonomous vehicle technology as a way to transform our physical urban form, creating a safer space for all modes of mobility, whether you're walking on the streets or biking on the streets or participating in vehicle transport across the city. I think there's huge opportunities there. So I hope that while I appreciate the challenges of coming up with regulations so early, I definitely would encourage you to reconsider the rule around licensed drivers at the wheel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rhett Bridges, and I'm representing Securing America's Energy Future as a member of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force. My comments today, although they'll sound a lot like Ashley Hand's, perhaps, are specifically with 22752's requirement for human operators.
Make sure that you speak into the microphone, because I'm sure the folks in the background can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? All right, I'll try to raise my volume. So, specifically, we do appreciate and share DMV's focus on safety. It's certainly a critical issue. However, our concern is that Californians may actually be safer without human operators. And here's why we believe that. Expecting a human operator to take over in an emergency situation may actually make autonomous vehicles less safe rather than more safe. Studies have shown that humans can take 7 seconds or more to take control and to react appropriately, and that often would be too long to avoid a collision. Simply put, it's safer to let the AV solve the problem than to turn over to a distracted operator and expect them to make that decision effectively. And I will say also that what we're looking at right now is a period of time before I think you'll see applications for autonomous vehicles. And there's a lot going on with technology there. And so,
are you saying that you believe that it'll be at some point in the future, or?
In about the time that they start actually implementing significant pilot projects. I think they're getting close, but I don't think there's any autonomous vehicle developer right now that says this is ready to hit the road. And so if you look at...
Sorry for interrupting, but I just want to be clear about what you're referencing. You're referencing a completely self-driving car, so a NHTSA Level 4 vehicle.
NHTSA Level 4 vehicle, which is basically what you're regulating here. Okay? So there are vehicles that have limited autonomy, but by your statutes, that's not what you're trying to address with the regulations. Is that correct?
Well, we have to regulate what is defined as autonomous vehicles in our statute. Loosely speaking, that correlates to a NHTSA Level 3 and a NHTSA Level 4 vehicle. So we do have to regulate a NHTSA Level 3 vehicle.
That's interesting to know. Thank you for that clarification. But I am speaking here about NHTSA Level 4 vehicles, and that's the part I'll try to address. Simply put, you know, I really think that these vehicles have the potential to significantly improve transportation safety, and that's the thing that we're both most concerned about, specifically for the regulations. But we're also concerned about a lot of issues that handicapped and seniors and low-income people in having more effective transportation, and also all the congestion that clogs our highways. So, according to NHTSA, over 550,000 people have died in vehicle accidents already in this century. And that's an amazing number. In fact, that number is over 100,000 more that died fighting all of America's wars in the last century. So it isn't a statistic. It's really about human lives, and it's an important consideration in deciding what the appropriate regulation should be and how long it will take to get Level 4 approved and on the road. You know, I was flying here from Denver, and I'm sitting in the plane de-icing, right? And in fact, it was the last flight that got out of Denver to come to LA, so I'm glad I was on it. But while I was sitting there, I was thinking about the fact that considering the number of people that die every year on our highways, that 737, we'd have to have 5 of those crashing a week in order to match that number. Horrific loss of lives. We have a horrific loss of lives already. And so the urgency of this approval is very important. Also, from a personal perspective, you know, when you're a senior, you come to a point where you have to give up your keys. Well, I'm approaching that. And when I give up my keys, and I've dealt with this with my parents and with my wife's parents, and when you give up your keys, you basically give up your independence. You're then dependent on everybody else if you can get people to take you where you need to be. So for seniors and for low-income people, the ability to have door-to-door transportation at a moderate cost, it has huge value. And certainly it has huge value to all of the handicapped people. and California and throughout America and the world. So the real concern is if these vehicles have to include operators, what real advantage do they have, these expensive autonomous vehicles have over today's personally owned vehicles or taxis? There's not a lot of incentive to make that transition. So the real benefits of truly autonomous level 4 vehicles is only going to be realized if they don't have to have drivers, we believe. So we hope that'll be considered. We fear that requiring licensed operators may substantially decrease their safety rather than improve their safety, and especially limit their market penetration in California. And I've tried to be brief in respect for your time, but I sure wouldn't want to have your job.
Just a couple of quick questions.
Certainly.
And I think I got from you that you talk about the potential of the technology, and it's probably not necessarily here yet. And we see some of our concerns, or some of the things that we see that are still impediments, like the vehicles not being able to handle specific weather conditions. And do you think that should play into how we look at the public deployment of the vehicles, like guaranteeing that they're ready to handle all the conditions that a driver may or that an operator may encounter?
Well, I have to say, having driven in driving rain and driven in heavy snowstorms and whiteouts and heavy fog, there are plenty of times when I shouldn't be on the road. And I'm in that 94% of humans that tend to contribute to these accidents sometimes. Not, fortunately, I haven't. But if you look at what really causes those accidents, it's often those kind of bad judgments, those driver errors, and distracted drivers, and drowsiness and drunkenness. And driverless cars don't suffer from those things. I think in the case that you described, there comes a point at which that driverless car should pull over to the side of the road. And I think that's probably what's going to happen.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Feliciano, and I am an assistive technology instructor at Blindness Support Services Incorporated in Riverside, California. I came here because I wanted to give some feedback as to what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. Now, I lost my sight 9 years ago. I used to have a license. I used to independently, get in a car and drive wherever I wanted to go. Now, I am visually impaired. I'm totally blind. And I train individuals that are blind, assistive technology. So I train them how to use this technology so that they can go to school or work. Now, many of us would like to have a self-driving car, and I'm one of them. Currently, we have various modes of transportation like Uber, Lyft, and the public transportation. And those modes of transportation are great because they allow us access to get to wherever we want to go. Just like the computer with screen readers allows us access the internet and do whatever it is that we need to do with the internet. Now, one of the things that I miss since I became visually impaired is just getting up and going wherever I want to go without having to rely on somebody or opening up an Uber app to get a driver. I wish one day we could have this Google car and just get up and go without having to tell anybody. And I currently do this as, my job. So one day, I understand that there are many safety concerns because I used to drive myself. I know what it is like out there. One day I wish that we have the same rights as everybody else and to have a Google car, even though we are unable to operate it because we're visually impaired. And Maybe one day I will train people how to use the Google car. And this goes for everybody that has disabilities and for people that are sighted. We should enforce some sort of class license, maybe like a class AV, where people have to take this test and pass it in order to be able to operate a self-driving car. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your suggestion.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
My name is Mark Golden. I'm Executive Director of the National Society of Professional Engineers. We are a more than 80-year-old organization that has worked for the licensing of professional engineers, a regime which exists in all 50 states and which places on the individual engineer an obligation to place the public health, safety, and welfare above all other considerations, even when that obligation puts them in conflict with an employer, a contract deadline, a budget. This issue of public health and safety is the heart and soul of our organization and the profession of professional licensed engineers. We very much appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. This is a challenging and difficult topic. We are generally supportive of the California DMV's approach to requiring a licensed vehicle. We believe that is prudent. We understand the zeal and the excitement and the pressure to move forward. We recognize and appreciate the tremendous potential that this technology and even the deployment of fully autonomous vehicles places to increase public safety, to increase the access and ability of persons with disabilities to participate fully in society. We do not view your requirement as an impediment. We view that, in fact, as a positive step forward toward this. I say that because we feel it is an important first step, not a final step. And in fact, the ability to gain real-world practical experience of the things that are not anticipated in the laboratory, or even in controlled tests on public roads, will become more apparent and more obvious, and we will learn from that experience, and this will in fact advance and speed the introduction of fully autonomous vehicles. Coincidentally, I've had a huge amount of experience in prior points in my career in the issue of disability access assistive technology through service on a number of industry panels and federal access boards, et cetera. I am extremely sensitive and sympathetic to the concerns of the disability community and appreciate the tremendous promise this technology holds for them. I would only say, reiterate again, that I do believe the approach that your board has taken is one which will, in fact, speed our progress towards that, and that the prudent, measured deployment of technology and allowing a period for it to establish and prove itself. My hope and expectation is that we will surprise ourselves by how quickly technologies that have limitations to begin with prove themselves and expand into the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ted Jackson with California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. We are a membership organization of 22 independent living centers across California, and who collectively currently serve about over 100,000 people with disabilities. We're very concerned about the progress of these regulations, and we would urge you to allow this testing and the release of the car to be on the roads in a level 4 capacity. We've already seen this in Nevada. Unfortunately, the state of Nevada is ahead of California, and as a Californian, I don't like to see that, but they've been doing this since 2012. And, the funny thing is, I was getting ready to come here, I was watching a Toyota commercial that had autonomous brakes. And if you watch this commercial and you realize as these brakes go off, the driver with the driver's license is so shocked by the action of what's happening in an almost accident, they're not going to be able to take over the car anyways. I think we've heard a lot of technological testimony and so forth today, and certainly in Sacramento, so I'm not going to go into a lot of that, but this would mean an incredible amount of independence for people with disabilities. Right now in California, the unemployment rate amongst people with disabilities, 69%. Just process that, 69%. Part of that is due to a lacking reliable transportation so that employers can rely on folks to work for them. Part of it's education, part of it's a whole bunch of other things. But this certainly would open the door to an incredible amount of independence for people with disabilities. I know, we heard last week in Sacramento that a lot of people talking about 20 years from now, 20 years from now. But the fact is we have to get started today for 20 years from now to happen. And the best way to get started is to test the car in the way it was intended to be tested, in the way it is eventually intended to be driven, so that we can get there, so that we can get to that place where we can have equality and independence for seniors, for people with disabilities, et cetera. And I know that you're interested in recommendations as well as some language. So we have sent a letter to your office in Sacramento. It has been signed on with some proposed recommendations. It's been signed on by 33 different disability and senior organizations from around California. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My name's Tankina Moimoi. A volunteer for Yo Disabled and Proud and the Disabled Resources Center in Long Beach. I got here to this meeting today with access, and usually if I come from, because I come from Long Beach, I have to, because I do realize it is a ride share. So if I come out towards LA, I would have to book 3 hours before the time I have to be there. And it's a good and it's a bad thing. Sometimes places are not open, and more than likely I need to use the restroom. With ride shares, it's hard because I'm someone with invisible disabilities. I say invisible because that's how I feel.
Take your time.
I'm often overlooked because I look normal. And I won't know that I was showed up on their system as a no-show because they just passed by and overlooked me. With these autonomous vehicles, I can just go. The reason why I don't have a license is because I know that I'm a threat to society, because I see one thing and think it's another. So I can see the light as red, but then really it's green, or vice versa. It's green, but then no. You get it, right? But with these autonomous vehicles, it could be my eyes for me. I mean, I have good vision, but then I don't trust this. My mentality is under construction, but that's why I do want you guys to approve this, to initiate this inaugural program. That's what pilot programs are for, to see what we can, to see what problems we have, and then progress from there. We had the 25th celebration. Yes, we're surviving. Now it's time for our 50th celebration, where we thrive. I want more independence and more security. Yeah, that's all my notes. That's all I remember.
Thank you. Those were excellent comments.
Thank you.
Good morning. Oh,
Good morning.
sorry about that. My name is Ronnie, and I am Ronnie Bayin, and I am a college student. And I really wanted to come today and just tell you how these cars are such a great improvement for our society, for our independence. Imagine this, right now, I'm in school, I take the bus, or I take the ferry something and get there 20, 30 minutes late to class. Or how about this, I'm in class, or I'm at school, I'm sorry, but my class is canceled. How am I going to, I'm going to have to wait the 3 hours, 4 hours until my reserved pickup in order to go home. I feel that that's not giving me all of my independence. These cars are, supposed to help us. Will there be mistakes? Will there be errors? There always seems to be, but there's always room to improve the technology. As we see day by day gets better and it learns from its mistakes. So by the time the pilot, time is over, we will already clear, everything and be perfect or almost too perfect for our public and our society. This is how our community will be able to continue to work, get to work, and not be late. Get to go out, on spontaneous events with friends, and don't have to tell them, nope, I need to reserve a pickup for tomorrow. We can do that tomorrow. So, with all the safety, I feel that no one cares more about our safety than ourselves. I think we know our limits. We know how to do. The problem of weather have been brought up a lot during. Well, we're out there in these weathers waiting for our buses. How is that? How is that okay? Are we just not supposed to contribute to society only because there's rain? I feel that with these cars we'll be able to just get faster without getting sick and be more independent. So there's been so many incredible comments from my colleagues. I just really hope you could just take it out into consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Hill.
Good morning.
K-E-L-L-Y. Last name is Hill, H-I-L-L. I currently work for Blindness Support Services Incorporated, and I would be remiss if I didn't come and address you on this issue. I think that nothing else has stirred the disabled community quite this much for a long time across all aspects of the disability community. And I think is it right that today we're only here to consider level 3 autonomy vehicles? And then at some future point there will be the ability to consider level 4 vehicles, is that correct? And it's a process with stages? Because I think people are afraid that if we don't move today, the whole thing won't just come back around, and it'll just somehow get pushed under the carpet, and we won't get back to it, and we won't have the chance to talk about the level 4 vehicles. And I also have concerns about the driver inside the vehicle. On my way to work here today, I asked my boss, I said, my supervisor, what do you think about these autonomous vehicles? And she said, no way, I wouldn't let a car drive because there's so many things that we can do. We can see a pothole in the road and just avoid it and do these things. And then when we got here, she had to put her makeup on in the parking lot before we could come in. And I think what would happen with people is that they would get into a vehicle that could be autonomous. And at first, they would be very hesitant about that autonomy, and they would be very cautious and careful. But then someone like my boss would say, well, you know, I'm going down the road, there's all this room on the freeway, and the car is supposed to be able to do this thing. And gradually over time, that person would begin to say, well, let me just put my makeup on here so I don't have to do it in the parking lot on the way. And gradually they would trust the car more and more and more until we got to a point where most people would really not be ready to take over the control of a vehicle most of the time. And they would, what? Wait, you mean you need me to take control of the vehicle? Wait, let me put down my iPad. Or wait, let me put this makeup brush down so I can go ahead and steer here. And my concern is that the regulations don't, I haven't seen any timeline for when we're going to reconvene and talk about the next level. I haven't seen any proposal about, you know, when are we going to consider level 4 autonomy in vehicles? And when we do, I think we need to consider what does a person have to be able to deal with if the autonomy did fail? You know, obviously you have to be able to get out of the car, you have to be able to, what? What do you have to be able to do in that situation as a person in a vehicle? Otherwise, we could just dump anybody into a vehicle and say, okay, the car's going to take you from point A to point B, and you know, so we do need pilot programs to study the situations that this whole technology is going to put people in, and the psychology of how people will actually deal with driving around in an autonomous vehicle and being able to manage their time a little bit differently. And I'm not sure that people are going to be able to take control, and it's counterproductive to not allow fully autonomous vehicles to be on the road, or at least come forward with a timeline for when we're going to discuss that. And I think too, we need to let people know how they could take part in those discussions. We need a structure and a framework.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. And one of the beauties about having a session like this is since this isn't the formal rulemaking, it allows the opportunity to hear comments like this, and as part of the process, fold in any changes to the draft regulations in contemplation of all of the input that we've gotten. So really, your suggestions are very valuable this morning. Thank you.
And so, Kelly, just to answer the question that you posed with regard to level 3 and level 4, you were spot on in that level 4 is something that needs to be considered. However, we don't have a structure at this point for a completely self-driving car to be first tested on our roadways. We need to move forward with that as well before it can be actually deployed.
So how can the rest of us participate? How can the rest of us participate in creating that structure, having input on what that structure would look like?
And I think that's the point that I was raising about getting comments like this with respect to this draft allows us the opportunity to look back. I've heard over the last several speakers a comment about a pilot program, and maybe that's something that we could look at as we go forward with, you know, a formal rulemaking proposal. Should we start considering things like that, working with manufacturers, possibly there being something like a pilot program where there's the actual testing of the vehicles without the driver inside, and looking at some, and even with the comments about folding in the disabled community as that goes forward. So the input that we're getting this morning is very valuable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of got a mind of its own there.
Just wanted to stay in one place for us. So hi, my name is Peter Shannon, and I am here representing Securing America's Future Energy. And in my full-time job, I'm a venture capital investor with Fire Lake Capital, based in Northern California. And in my job is around investing in sustainability. So that includes things like renewable energy. It also includes technologies that improve resource efficiency around transportation. Okay. Should I speak more? It also includes investments in technologies that involve more efficient uses of transportation resources. My background before that is in software engineering, and prior to this phase of my career, I was a developer of computer vision systems which underlie one of the technologies that underlie the technology stack that is enabling autonomous vehicles today. So I have some familiarity with the limitations, the risks, the development process, and how we should expect that technology to evolve over time. So I very much embrace transportation safety and really respect the efforts of the DMV to take the first steps into this new era with a regulatory framework that attempts to balance the needs of public safety in the near term with alongside the tremendous social and economic benefits that autonomous vehicles will bring in the future. Autonomous vehicles are really just one example of new technologies that we will experience in our lifetimes that are software-driven systems interacting alongside us in the physical world. This successful deployment of autonomous passenger vehicles will inform us in many ways. However, in reading these draft regulations, I have a few observations. In general, I would like to see us strengthen the requirements for so-called semi-autonomous vehicles and the standards by which we certify those, yet I would also like to accommodate the future technology that will bring us fully autonomous vehicles. It occurs to me that the regulations as they're drafted today may actually hinder the only truly safe autonomous vehicles, those that are not dependent on a human in the loop, while allowing vehicles that adhere to the idea of safe semi-autonomy backstopped by alert humans. In my opinion, this is dangerous. Humans today allow themselves distractions such as texting, email, and videos, even in manually driven cars, and even though these activities are expressly illegal. My view is that this will only increase as experience lulls drivers into a misplaced sense of trust in a semi-autonomous system that feels safe almost all of the time, but that in rare and unpredictable moments can lose its orientation and require emergency human intervention. I share Google's conclusion that autonomous vehicles dependent on a human in the loop are not a safe alternative. Further, I'm concerned that society's experience with the introduction of these early vehicles may actually be negative and hinder the rollout of our ultimate goal, fully autonomous vehicles. So, my opinion is that regulations could be shaped to accommodate autonomous capabilities that, perhaps while not initially capable on all roads or at all times of day or in all types of weather, require no human intervention within their scope of capability, and can gracefully hand over control to a human or come to a stop in a fail-safe manner in the event that the driver doesn't respond.
Peter, would you mind repeating what you just said again?
Just the sentence?
Yeah.
Sure. My opinion is that regulations should be shaped to accommodate autonomous capabilities that perhaps while not initially capable on all roads, at all times of day, or in all types of weather, require no human intervention within their scopes of capability, and can gracefully hand over control to a human or come to a stop in a fail-safe manner in the event that the driver doesn't respond. For example, if an autonomous vehicle is designed and certified to operate autonomously on interstate highways, then I think the standard should be that it should not require an alert driver at that time to intervene in case the system gets confused. And as the technology matures and it becomes capable of not just interstate highway travel, but rural roads and surface streets in urban areas, then the technology will show us through a certification process when it's ready to accommodate transportation without a licensed driver behind the wheel. But our framework today can let us see how the technology progresses to get to that point without expressly excluding it. I further suggest that the regulations we create today anticipate and accommodate fully autonomous vehicles capable of operating safely without a licensed driver. It's difficult to pinpoint when this technology will be ready, but technology moves much faster than regulation. So we should put in place regulation today that appropriately sets the bar for this technology and accommodates it gracefully when ready.
Thank you.
How you doing? My name is Edward Davis, and I am a member of the National Federation of Blind for the Inland Empire chapter.
Good morning, and thank you for coming this morning.
Okay, I'm also a volunteer instructor down at Service Center for Independent Life, where I do technology instruction. I just want to speak a little bit about technology and where I would be right now without it. I'd be sitting home alone in the dark by myself. I was scared of technology when I first became blind, but without it now, like I said, I'd be home alone in the dark. This technology is welcome, is needed. I cannot tell you how much it would improve my life. Not only just the ability to go and come as I please, but also the extra added expense that I have to pay to have people take me here and there and I have to conform to their schedules. Us in the community, we've been stranded. Access, these different programs are all very beautiful things. But if they mess up, you're stuck for 3 hours. And for me, a big guy, that's not a big thing. But when you get a nice lady sitting out on the street by herself, alone in the dark, it's not good. This would eliminate a lot of these things. Within the blind community, we are 70% unemployed. This would allow us to get back and forth to work. So I just ask you people to please consider us when you're making your decisions. The car doesn't make problems. It doesn't break the law. People do. This car is not going to run over anybody. You know what I'm saying? It's people running over people. It's people having accidents, not these cars. And I just ask you to, think about us as you move forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi.
Good morning.
My name is Jeanette Heitman, and I am with the Service Center for Independent Life in Claremont. We serve a catchment area from the 15 freeway all the way to Alhambra, from the foothills all the way over to the 60 freeway. And I don't mean to make a joke, but a funny thing happened to us on the way to this hearing today. I planned on bringing 7 consumers to this hearing with us today, and there was a train wreck in West Covina, which required that everybody get off the train in Montclair. I then had to scramble to pick people up from the train station and work out transportation for only 4 of them, because I've got a little car. We got in my car and we came to this hearing because it's just that important to us for you to understand. As I look around this room, everybody's got a smartphone. Everybody's got a smart device. As you go through your day today, I request that you look at how dependent and independent these technologies make you. Look at your home, look at your car. You trust your backup mirrors. You trust your backup camera. These technologies do not suffer the same woes that we as human beings do. They don't get stressed out. They don't get tired. They don't make snap decisions. I, as a licensed driver, would actually trust the car more than I trusted myself getting here on the 10 freeway today. When I look for technology, I looked for Google to bring me to this very building today. And the autonomy of it is so important. My coworker and my counterpart, Angela Wokiki, every day takes transportation from Fontana all the way to Claremont. She then has to get home, and part of the way she gets home is when she gets off the train, she has to call Uber or Lyft or one of those, or Access, to come and get her. She would be perfectly capable to get in one of these vehicles and go home. Isn't that what we all want? It's just to be able to go where we need to go when we need to get there. And that's all we're asking is, don't, by limiting your regulations, limit a population that's already mobily discriminated against. Give us an opportunity to help you understand what these regulations mean to us as a people. Back in the 80s, I remember them saying the internet was just a fad. It wasn't ever going to go anywhere. This may seem like a fad to a lot of people, but Los Angeles, as one of the smartest, most forward-thinking communities in the United States, should really make the ultimate smart decision and allow these autonomous vehicles to operate in the manner in which they were designed. You trust them in your life. Please, trust them in our lives like we would. We just want to do the same things you guys do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Luis Hernandez. I'm a travel training instructor at Blindness Support Services Incorporated, and I am visually impaired. I could go on and on about the endless amounts of seniors and disabled who would benefit from this vehicle. But as a father of 2 young children, I can only speak about how it would change my life and the ability to be able to take them to and pick them up from school, the ability to take them to recreational locations so that I could spend time with my family, but more importantly, the ability to take them to the hospital in emergency situations, or take them to get medication in the middle of the night when they're sick, when normal business hour stores are not open. And I understand your concern for safety. I would not want to put my children in a vehicle that I felt was not safe for my family, but I feel that if this regulation is put in place, that it would maybe slow down the advancement of this technology, or even the companies that are creating these vehicles may lose interest in this technology, eventually lose interest in this technology altogether. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Swenson. I'm an attorney with the Scali Law Firm. We're a boutique firm that represents clients throughout the automotive industry. I've read the proposed regulations, and I'd like to urge the DMV to take a forward-looking view and to craft language that doesn't inhibit the development and innovation of technology. I think I'm not alone in observing that this technology moves along 2 tracks, the incremental addition of driverless or autonomous features to our existing vehicles, and a fully autonomous vehicle favored by the tech companies. And it appears that the language that the DMV is using in their proposed regulations tracks more closely this incremental approach. And I would just encourage you, as you are drafting these regulations, to use language that contemplates, anticipates, and allows for the innovation of technology.
Do you have some language that you would like to suggest to us?
Well, I have some language that I think is problematic. In particular, any time that the regulations stick to a particular device, such as a steering wheel, or talk about a person taking over the vehicle's driving capabilities, if those languages, or that language, and those points of interface between the person and the car are worded such that they are open and allow for innovative technologies and things that we aren't necessarily using right now, but contemplate the same safety goals and targets that I think we all agree are at the foremost importance with this technology.
Okay. So the good of having a session like this is to hear comments about what are the inadequacies of the regulations, and so what will really help us, and maybe not necessarily today, but as you go back and think about it, constructive comments that could help us craft a regulation that we can propose for formal adoption.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lonnie Daly, and I am the Community Relations Coordinator and Assistant to Executive Director Paula Margison from Dale McIntosh Center for the Disabled. And I'm actually very excited of what I've heard at this testimony and some of the suggestions that have been offered. I've also been put at ease by some of the feedback that I hear you giving to the people speaking. Specifically, you had asked somebody if they would be open to having these driver's license regulations for a period of time. That gives me hope. I would only hope that in the regulations that do come up, you do have provisions written in there to reevaluate that regulation, not to let it fall through the cracks and things to go on as usual because people aren't looking at the issue anymore. So I think it would be a safety valve or safety net for people I represent for you to consider based on data received, based on safety factors, based on things that happen through those pilots, that you have specific regulation that gives you time periods where you'll go back and reevaluate and reassess based on new technology developed and based on all the data. I'm really excited, and this gives me hope. This gives me hope that you're not trying to stop that process for a fully autonomous car. It gives me hope for full inclusion and access for all Americans, which everybody deserves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Joseph DeWolf Sandoval. I'm the president of the California App-Based Drivers Association. This is an association of drivers who utilize a smartphone-based application to conduct delivery services and ride-sharing services. Right now in Los Angeles, we have nearly 5,000 members, and we're growing. And I've been asked to come here today to talk to you about this particular perspective that you may not have heard, at least from this side of the seat. First, let me say that we embrace technology. Our drivers use technology every day to earn their livings. We are not coming here saying that we want to go back to the old style of livery services. And in fact, we all recognize that ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft are really the wave of the future. And in this gig economy, it's not only limited to transportation services, but it's also going out in all directions. And we embrace that. Personally, as I was meeting with our members and asking them what did they want me to convey to the Department of Motor Vehicles this morning, and a lot of them said, well, you know, no one is crazy enough to drive or ride in one of these autonomous vehicles. Who would want to do that? And I stood up and I said, well, personally, I would. I would be happy to have an autonomous Tesla or an autonomous Audi in my driveway, and I would certainly use it, and I would embrace it. Because the fact of the matter is, they're safer than the majority of the drivers on the road. But also the fact of the matter is that as long as the majority of the drivers on the road don't have autonomous vehicles, there is going to be a problem. These cars are just too smart. I was reading last night about one of the Google cars getting stuck in an intersection because each driver on the other part of the intersection was creeping forward, and the Google car didn't know what to do because it was waiting. It was waiting for everybody to stop, and that doesn't happen in California. We even have a stop named after it called the California Stop. But if I had a driverless Tesla, I would have zero problems jumping in with my two kids, 8 and 10 years old, going down to Whole Foods or taking them to the jiu-jitsu classes and coming back. But as a parent, there is no way that I would just put them in the back of the car at 8 and 10 years old and send them off on their own devices, hoping this car was going to be doing all of the driving and the supervising and the adult supervision that needs to be had in the back seat of that car. And I'm going to be talking about adult supervision as it relates to Uber. And I'm just getting started. So, you know, would I have a problem personally, or my members have a problem personally, if every car on the road was autonomous? No. In fact, I think that is the ultimate point where we're going to have the most safety on our streets. Now, am I going to fly up to San Francisco on an autonomous Southwest Airlines? No. There's a reason that there are pilots behind that seat. You know, these vehicles, these airplanes can take off, they can fly, and they can land by themselves. And as I was doing research for this, I realized that in 1912 was the first autopilot. It's been more than a century since planes have been able to fly in some way or another with an autopilot. But the FAA won't allow a flight to leave LAX to San Francisco unless there is a pilot behind that stick. In the event that there is something that goes wrong, that pilot can come in and take over. I've heard people this morning say, well, I'm really concerned because, as somebody's driving, maybe they're not going to have the quick enough reflexes. Well, that may be true, but there's a certain amount of safety that there's somebody behind that wheel. And I would like you to consider what the FAA has done and their logic in reasoning in not allowing regulations to even come to their desk that would allow for a pilotless plane. Now, as I'm sitting here listening to people, and I do see their arguments, and they do have very sound arguments, it seems to me like there's a diversion, and this is what I'm going to suggest in terms of draft regulations for the DMV. Now, I know I'm going to say this, and the minute this sentence comes out, it's going to cost Uber hundreds of thousands of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions and backdoor meetings, but I'm going to say it anyway because I've never been afraid of Uber or the controversy. There really has to be, in the regulations, an exception for livery vehicles, whether they be Ubers, Lyft, Curb, Sidecar, Cabzilla, buses, anything that involves public transportation. Now, I'm fine driving a driverless autonomous Tesla because I'm in that car. And maybe I'm even fine sitting in the passenger seat and not in the driver's seat, but I still want to be there. But in terms of what happens in the backseat of an Uber, or what happens every single day, and especially at night, it's a whole different story. And this is why I think you need to consider this outside of what other people are talking about services for the disabled, and bringing forth this technology and getting to level 4. Unfortunately, and fortunately actually, the existence of Uber has really taken a lot of drunk drivers off the streets. And they're proud of that fact. And they partner with MAD. And they tell everybody, oh, not only are we creating jobs for the veterans that are coming back from the Gulf War, and we're creating a system where we have people that are not driving drunk, and we're causing these communities to be safer. It's not safer in that back seat. I speak to you from experience. Not only am I the president of this association, but in order to really understand what our drivers were going through, I put my time behind that wheel. 2,500 trips. That's not hours, that's trips. So I know what I'm talking about. And personally, on 3 occasions, I had to stop that car to keep somebody from raping a drunk woman in the back seat. So many times I've had to help people that have had disabilities, either permanent or just temporary, get into the back seat of that car. And that's what a driver is for. Now, I appreciate that some people may have their own driverless autonomous vehicles, and they may have their own disabilities, and I think that is really great. But when you're relying on somebody else to help you in the back seat of an Uber or a Lyft, onto a bus, into an access, you need to have a driver there. Uber and Lyft are really driving this argument. You can see it all over the country. So far, every DMV that I've been able to track down and look at that have proposed these regulations have followed your logic and your reasoning, which is sound, and it is really based upon, in our opinion, and the association's opinion, public safety. Save for one state that I could find, Arizona. Now, Arizona took the different tact. And they said, okay, we're going to allow these level 4 vehicles on our roads today within the confines of a university system. Uber was instrumental in getting that accomplished. They promised to put a customer service facility in Arizona. They donated money to the university, and the governor signed an executive order, which I'm sure you're aware of, saying, okay, forget about the Department of Motor Vehicles. My executive order says that this is going to take place regardless of what the DMV thinks about public safety on the streets, something that you guys are charged with and that you have studied, and this is your career. The governor said, well, I think otherwise. Now, my fear is that Governor Brown, who has already shown that he is willing to take up Uber's fight, when we fought for appropriate insurance regulation 2 years ago in Sacramento. Or, I'll throw this out there, Governor Garcetti, maybe that's my crystal ball, will do the same because he has shown that, that he is really very much drinking Uber Kool-Aid as well. The Department of Motor Vehicles should take a firm stand on this. You know, you should look first to public safety and come down on the side of history that is going to say, yes, you know, we drew this line, and sure, if the governor comes back later, whichever governor it may be, and signs an executive order or otherwise, at least you can say, we were doing our job. We did our job here. And, you know, you are not limiting technology. I'm not asking for that. You know, I would love to see a day where every car is autonomous, and I do believe that is going to be the ultimate factor in safety. But with respect to livery services, you know, when you really need adult supervision in that front seat, when you have unsupervised minors, which happens all the time with Ubers, in the back seat, parents just putting them in and saying, take them to jiu-jitsu, take them to piano, pick them up. I don't think that that is truly addressed in your regulations. Nowhere in your regulations have I been able to find, or in fact in the other states that I've looked at these regulations, something that addresses public transportation and the livery services. You've been talking in broad scope about the vehicles themselves, but not necessarily about the services that are provided by these vehicles. So, in conclusion, and I could talk all day about this, but I'm going to defer to the people behind me, and I'd be happy to suggest my own written regulations if I could get an email address after the meeting.
Yeah, there's an email address on the agenda this month.
Okay.
So if you have something that you would want to submit in writing,
I will.
You could submit it to that email address. One thing I should point out to you, because you mentioned Governor Brown, I just want to point out to you that Senate Bill 1298, which is the foundation for why we're here today, was actually signed by Governor Brown back in the fall of 2012. So just want to point that out to you.
I'm aware of that, and I'd like to point out to you that he was instrumental in blocking AB 2293, which was the insurance.
That I can't speak to.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can. But I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the California App-Based Drivers Association, and I hope that when we do see the regulations come down, it will consider this public transportation issue and not just look in big terms about the vehicles themselves. Thank you.
My name is Kaushik Raghu. I'm a senior staff engineer at Audi, the Volkswagen Group of America. Our office, the Electronics Research Laboratory, is in the Silicon Valley. First off, it was very powerful hearing so many people speak about what this technology means to them. And I consider myself incredibly lucky to be working on this every day and trying to bring this into fruition. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to comment on these, on this document. I'm here to speak about the manufacturer's driver operator training plan covered under section 227.84 in your document. So when most people get their driver's license, they often use an automatic transmission vehicle. But then later on, they may choose to drive a manual transmission. They go through their own process to learn how to drive a manual transmission. They do not go back to the OEM to get a special training, or they do not come to the DMV to get a special certificate. Similarly, 15 years ago when I first learned how to drive, there were no backup cameras. And today, most cars have backup cameras, and there was no process where the driver has to go learn this. You could say the same about lane centering or adaptive cruise control or other technologies that are becoming more and more common, or even electronic stability program. Another example would be with the Class C, I guess, the driver's license that most people have, they can rent a motorhome, a small size or a mid-size motorhome, and they can go somewhere for the weekend or for the vacation. They may have never driven that before. That could be the first time they're driving this. So what we think is if you look at level 3, this is SAE, level 3 automated system, the learning curve for a system like that is not going to be as complicated as learning how to drive a manual transmission. if you knew how to drive an automatic transmission. So the requirement to go through, that's in section 227.84, we are not sure is necessary for the SAE level 3 type of automated systems. And that is my main comment on this section.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that we were concerned about, and I'm not going to call out a specific manufacturer, but we started seeing as something as simple as lane keep with adaptive cruise control and emergency braking. As that technology was introduced, we saw a wealth of YouTube videos that showed people not operating it appropriately, maybe using it in manners that weren't necessarily safe and probably weren't intended by the manufacturer. So one of the concerns with this section is that the technology is going to be new for anyone who operates the vehicle, and we want to make sure that as it's introduced, part of that goal is the safe introduction of it, is that people actually know how to work the technology and know not to push it beyond what it's capable of doing. So, I mean, and that's the intent of a section like this. So if you have some suggestion how we can accomplish that goal to make sure that once the technology is deployed, that it's deployed safely and that people have received proper instruction on how to use it, that would be a big help.
So we will be submitting written comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaushik.
Okay, it's now 5 after 1. I'm going to go ahead and get started back again. I'm not sure if he's back in the room, but there was one more gentleman that wanted to comment right before we took the lunch break. And so if he is back in the room, we'll take his comment now. I don't see him, but we'll have him come up when he comes back in. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and move on in the agenda to the next section, which is vehicle safety certifications, and the subheadings under that are the behavioral competencies, manufacturer safety certifications, and the third-party vehicle demonstration tests. And so if there's anyone out there who wants to be heard on those subject matters, please feel free to come on forward again to the podium. I'll remind you that if you can speak into the microphone, I know it's a little problematic and there's a little static that comes through, but the folks that are for the recording and getting this on so that we can post it on our website, we're concerned that we won't have the audio of the people that are speaking at the podium. So if you have a chance, move that microphone down a little closer to your mouth and go ahead and speak right into it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call up, is there anyone that wants to be heard on vehicle safety certifications, behavioral competencies, manufacturer safety certifications, and third-party vehicle demonstration test? Okay.
Hello, my name is Barbara Wendling. I work for Volkswagen Group of America in Auburn Hills, Michigan. And I'm not prepared to go into a great deal of detail here. It's probably not the right forum for it anyway, but just as a kind of overarching comment, I think from our perspective as an established OE, what we see overall in the proposal is a great deal of cost and various forms of risk, intellectual property and liability and other forms of risk. And on the other side of the equation, we don't really have a selling proposition if we have to tell the customer that, they have to pay attention the whole time that their level 3 traffic jam pilot system is engaged. So we're having a hard time making the math work out, if you will, the way things stand. And as I said, we will give you more specific feedback, but from just a high level and a general standpoint, we offer that comment and hope you'll give it some serious thought, because it's just hard to square the way things stand.
So Barbara, when you mentioned cost, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so it's not just the specific costs, which will add up, the costs that are mentioned in the proposal, but in addition, of course, all the resources that we'd have to put behind that to, for example, demonstrate to you that we've done a good job in our development process, which we do a good job, right? We've been doing a good job for 100 years, and we've never had to up front tell any government exactly how we do things, right? Or prove to you that our development process was done correctly, or redo some of our development process for you just for demonstration purposes, because we don't see there's any value added for that. But all of that does add up cost, and then the way the regulations are written, there's risk of compliance, there's risk of loss of IP, there's various other kinds of risks and liabilities. And then when you look on the benefit side of it, both for our customers and for us as an OE vehicle manufacturer who has to sell a product, the balance isn't there, I guess, is what we see.
Would you have some certifications? Because part of that thought process from us is how are we assured that the certifications that we get are actually valid certifications? And so, in trying to strike that balance, what would you suggest that we would do in order to make sure that when we get those types of certifications from the manufacturer, we can actually live with them and have comfort with them?
I think we talked about this in previous hearings. The world looks a little different from the standpoint of an established OE because we've been doing this all along, and every safety innovation that's ever been deployed was invented by a vehicle manufacturer or its suppliers, or more likely both of them together. And so it's our business. It's the way we've always done it, right? We self-certify. We do our development process. It's not like, okay, we're going to do Traffic Jam Pilot and we have just a single development program. It's cumulative, right? Traffic Jam Pilot builds on lots of systems we've built over many decades, right? So even if you say, well, prove to me your development process was right, we're reaching way back in history. It gets sort of silly. But, I think the point is that for established OEs, you don't have a lot of risk, right? If we tell you that we've certified the product and we put the full faith and credit of the company behind that, I don't think you have a huge amount of risk, particularly when the reference is a human driver. For a low-speed system like a Traffic Jam Pilot, if you're talking about new entrants to the market, you might have different risks. And we don't speak to that because we're not new market entrants. We're not a startup company that's trying to do something that we've never done before. And so, again, I think what we would suggest is if your real concern is new market entrants and people who may not have, the history and the full faith and credit behind it and everything else, you might want to consider writing special regulations for them and not cause a lot of hardship for established OEs, right?
Would you be submitting some suggestions for us in written comments?
Yes.
One thing I want to point out is as we go through this process, is getting to the stage where we actually have a proposal of what would be the proposal to go out for a 45-day comment period. People that want to submit written comments, I would encourage them to probably do that sooner in the next 2 weeks, so that we can start establishing a time schedule of when we'll start doing the next step of the process. And of course, part of that is reading these written comments and evaluating them and seeing how they would fit in to additional developments on these regulations. So I want to encourage you, if you really want to submit those written comments, there is an email, a mailbox that's listed on the bottom of the agenda, if I'm not mistaken. It is. If you could send those comments within the next 2 weeks to that email box, we can start taking a look at them.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan Handel, entertainment and technology attorney, former computer scientist, not representing any particular client or interest here other than my perception of the public interest. It's a pleasure to have come to, first of all, be back with you, having spoken to you a year ago. It's a pleasure to find, coming in just after lunch, that I'm following the gentlewoman from VW, who was the reason that you saw me a year ago, because prior to that, she told you during an earlier workshop that she was convinced that none of the manufacturers then in the room, which I took to be the major manufacturers and Google in the room at the time, would ever put an unsafe product on the road. She's told you something similar today, which is that, at least as regards established vendors, that you have nothing, if I'm quoting her as closely as I can, that you have nothing to worry about. That she's not speaking to the unestablished, the new entrants, but you have nothing to worry about. That's very interesting coming from someone from VW. The assurance that a major manufacturer would surely comply with regulations and that you really don't have to concern yourself with that. I have to assume that VW said the same thing to the environmental regulators, whom it misled. The environmental regulators for whom VW created false and falsified software to create false test results. The environmental regulators for whom VW it created a development process that made diesel look cleaner than it was because it was in their corporate interests. That, unfortunately, is what we deal with. I'm a technologist. I'm a former computer scientist. I'm someone who loves gadgets. I'm someone who loves technology. I'm someone who looks forward to this technology because I look forward to using it, because it'll reduce costs, and it'll help the disabled, and because it's cool. So I am, mark me down in that column. But mark me down in the column also that says that it is unfortunate that we live with a paradox in the modern world, which is that technology, by and large, does not get created by Thomas Edison alone or with 5 people working for him in a small lab. It gets created by large companies. And what we've learned from the organizational behavior of large companies is that they lie. They cover up. They exercise their own conception of self-interest. And the auto industry in particular has an unbroken record of doing that for the last 60 years, 55, 60 years. You can go back to Unsafe at Any Speed, Ralph Nader's seminal work in the 60s. You can look at the opposition to seatbelts. You can look at the opposition later on to passive safety measures, to airbags, to safety glass. You can look at the deliberate cover-ups. You can look at, as the VW woman was speaking 2 years ago about how no one would put an unsafe product onto the road. You can look at the GM ignition switch that was happening at that same time, the Firestone debacle, the Takata debacle, on and on it goes. You are the firewall. You have been placed at Google's insistence, because Google was the one who had legislation written to their liking in Nevada and then came to California and said, do the same thing or we'll take our cars away, and had legislation written that the governor signed at Google headquarters. You've been placed in a position that you didn't previously occupy, which is that you now have to regulate the safety of the device, the machine, not just the safety of the driver. And we're moving towards a world where there won't be any drivers, ultimately probably, for whom you'll have to regulate safety. It's a pivot for DMV. Unless I misread, what I see proposed here is manufacturer self-certification followed by demonstration testing in front of a third-party entity. That's insufficient. It's absolutely insufficient. Now, why is it insufficient? First of all, why can't we trust the manufacturers? As I said, because they lie. And that includes Google. The tech business has a cleaner reputation than the auto industry does. But of course, you're not writing regs just for Google. You're writing regs for all market entrants, number one. Number two, Google itself has lied when it's come to privacy. They're under a consent decree, a 20-year consent decree, an unprecedented decree, which they then allegedly violated a year after entering into it, and entered into a large settlement, I believe an unprecedentedly large settlement, with the Federal Trade Commission on that. So you can't trust the companies. Now, why is it not sufficient to simply say, okay, we're going to have third-party demonstration testing? The reason it's not sufficient is that software cannot be verified by running it. Now, that sounds ironic, that sounds odd, but it's true. And I'm not the only one saying that. The FDA, looking at the safety of software in embedded medical devices, says exactly that, and I'm quoting as directly as I can from them in saying that. The reason is that all software of any, other than 5 lines that you write that print out "Hello World," has great complexity to it. There's a lot of branching. There are a lot of input conditions, and software can run this pathway at one moment, a different pathway at another moment, and never the exact same thing twice. Now, that's particularly true if you're talking about real-time software that interacts with the real world and makes machinery behave in accordance with real-world inputs, which, of course, a driverless car is. In fact, a driverless car is what's called a hard real-time system, because if it reacts a little bit too late, the consequences are not just inconvenience. Why isn't my phone, popping up a screen that I want? The consequences can be death. Parts of a car are not hard real-time systems. If you push the seat and the button for the seat takes a moment to think and then moves forward, that's annoying. The car takes a few moments extra to decide to brake, that's more than annoying. Secondly, self-driving cars fall into another category of software that is particularly complex, and that is expert systems or artificially intelligent systems. These are systems where the algorithms, the design of the program is not simply, say, with a word processing program, did the user type another character? Okay, let's insert it and display it on the screen. Okay, does that make the line too long? All right, let's think about flowing the text and reformatting the paragraph. Now, did the page get too long? Now we got it, blah, blah, blah. The complexity in Microsoft Word is one thing, and is certainly there, and it's a buggy program itself. The complexity in an artificially intelligent or expert system is obviously orders of magnitude greater. And this is an expert system that interacts as a hard real-time system with the real world. You simply can't get from point A, which is where we are now, to point B, safe deployment, which is where you want to get, by following the pathway that you've laid out in these regs. What I'd like to hear briefly from you, since this is something of a recapitulation of comments that I certainly made a year ago, I'd like to hear your thinking and why it is that you took the approach that you did.
That's something that we would include in a statement of reasons when we go for the formal regulatory proposal. But if you have some suggestions for things that you would like to see in the regulations, if you think that the demonstration test model that we've suggested in this draft proposal is insufficient, what would be your suggestion for something that you would deem sufficient?
I have several suggestions. One is that the portion of the regulations that says what the manufacturer has to certify, that they have a safe development process and a safe product and so on and so forth, that you require that a third party certify that as well. So you've got the framework right there. Secondly, you have a key question here, the definition of hazard, because the way the regs are structured, what you are asking people to certify with regard to safety is that there aren't hazards, or that hazards are being to the technological system, or that they're being appropriately mitigated. I think that definition needs to be fleshed out to talk about the kinds of hazards that have to be encompassed. You're within that. You're talking about, I think, a 2 or 3 line definition that alludes to an area that's technologically extremely complex, and you're giving no guidance in doing that to manufacturers, nor to decision makers, to judges, if it comes down to that. So to specify, for example, that among, including but not limited to, the sorts of hazards we're talking about, so I'm not saying strike the language you have, but I'm saying add to it, would be the potential for software errors, aka bugs, the potential, obviously, for hardware failures, whether mechanical or electronic, the potential for errors of integration of hardware and software, and things of that sort. And I will supply you, and will endeavor to supply within 2 weeks, some additional written out thoughts on that. But I think that does need to be added to. I would also call your attention to the retention provisions that you have for the third party demonstration company. You're requiring that records be retained for 3 years. I would suggest 15 years, and or that the records be turned over as a matter of course rather than only on request to DMV. 3 years is quite short. We're dealing with GM ignition switch issues that go back 15 years, and if that GM ignition switch had been subjected to a third-party demonstration, and then we were to be told publicly, yeah, there was a third-party demonstration, but we shredded the records after 3 years, that would not be an answer that would reflect well on whoever the regulator in that context was. The public deserves more. These are devices that stay on the road for many years. These are devices that iterate, so that even when a new generation is on the road, the demonstration results from an earlier generation are relevant. There really is no reason. I mean, frankly, there's no reason for not requiring that these records be retained indefinitely. And I think the best way to do that would be to provide them to DMV, because these you don't have a guarantee that a certification company, for example, is not going to go out of business, move its offices, lose its records, et cetera. And that's not an answer that one wants. I once again would emphasize the reason, the underlying logic for the statement that I'm making and the statement the FDA makes that running software is inadequate can be seen if you think about what a test panel might look like, a program of tests might look like. And, you know, manufacturer or the third party or you guys in the context of the OL 318 documents require that X, Y, Z, A, B, C, the following, 5 hours worth of tests be done with the following, 30 maneuvers, let's say, 30 scenarios. I can already tell you that that's inadequate because I can say, what if at the same time any of those things happen, someone's turning left in front of the car? All right, I've just doubled the panel and doubled the amount of time. What if the vehicle had been operating for hours and hadn't been rebooted? Any device has inadequacies in keeping a clean state. You've got to reboot your cell phone or your PC from time to time to make the thing operate properly. So someone's been driving for 5 hours on the freeway and something happens and the car fails, and that's a failure mode that might not have happened if they'd just been driving on the freeway for 5 minutes. The car gets, you can think of it as the computer gets tired, quote unquote, but obviously what's going on is that memory is getting corrupted and not all being recovered, and there are all sorts of things of that sort. And I can double it again. There's a glint in the eye of the sensor from the angle of the sun that just happened to exist, and there's a piece of road debris that gets kicked up and flies at the angle past the sensor that is perceived as something that isn't there, and on and on. You simply can't get there by testing, and so what you really are doing is applying a very loose filter to what in essence amounts to reliance on the manufacturer's self-certification. And it'd be lovely if we could trust these folks. It would be lovely if we could trust large enterprises. But we know whether it's banks, whether it's auto companies, whether it's Google, we can't. And that's what I'm asking you to consider in revising these regulations.
Sure. Well, we look forward to getting your comments, because the great thing about this session and about this process is that you'll have the opportunity to submit something to us that would include all of your suggestions as we work towards the goal of drafting what would be the set of the regulations that would be the full proposal. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way. I started without thanking you all and the staff in the back and the staff back home in, as it were, in Sacto for the work that you've been doing. You're under a lot of pressure. It's an exciting task, I think, probably for you, but also a nerve-wracking one and a difficult one. And I do think that the level of consideration that you've been giving and the process that you've laid out involving both informal workshops and formal hearings is one that's made it possible for the public to participate. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next speaker, please come on forward.
Thank you. I'm Rhett Bridges, and I am a member of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force of Securing America's Energy Future. I want to start with a few personal comments first, though, and these are not necessarily policy of SAFE, Securing America's Energy Future. I first will say that I have no investments in any of the companies that are involved here and that are being discussed here today, other than broad mutual funds or something like that. So I don't have an economic, and I'm not paid for my work in SAFE. And so, I'm here basically with a reasonably objective perspective on this. But I would say that when you look at Volkswagen and you look at the impact that what they did had on that company and on that company's market value, it's not a few $1 billion in fines. I mean, they tumbled in market value as a result of that. So I respectfully disagree that there has to be, in all cases, an independent certification. And so these companies pay a price. They'll pay a price in their brand for a long time for that. And certainly the shareholders are not happy campers at this time. So going back to my testimony for SAFE, it is always challenging to regulate a rapidly evolving technology. And delaying its benefits without delaying its benefits. And these comments are specifically directed at Section 227.64, the amendment application process, and also California Vehicle Code Section 38755E2. So, first off, as written, requiring a full reapplication process, as is specified in 227.64B, could substantially delay the issuance of over-the-air software fixes for serious safety issues by over half a year, putting the public in the process at significant risk. So, example of this, I don't want to beat up on Tesla particularly, but when they first put out their fully autonomous vehicles, they aren't yet fully autonomous, but when they first introduced their automatic driving system, the autopilot, there were some real problems with it. And the problems with it were that they didn't consider the human factors. They just didn't consider how many people out there would abuse that process. And so they had to come up with a solution that basically required guaranteed attention to what was going on in the process of using that system. However, and when they realized that some humans couldn't come up with that, some humans couldn't be trusted with that initial autopilot release, they fairly quickly were able to upload a pretty significant change in how that works in order to guarantee a reasonable level of safety and attention. So, given the need for protecting the safety of vehicle owners and the general public, all the people that could have been killed by some of those crazy people, and considering also the product liability of manufacturers, specific exceptions should be considered to the requirement that a new application be applied at that time, requirement for that new application for public deployment. The process requires a minimum of 180 days to comply with California Vehicle Code Section 38755E2. And that exception would apply to the rapid deployment of software fixes that correct a potential safety defect. And in accordance with 227.66, the DMV would be notified at the time of its discovery, and the details of the defect, including testing reports and the modified software, should be provided to the DMT at the time of deployment of that safety fix. So we'd hope that you would consider that, and we will work on language to try to address that.
Sure. I just need to point out that section that you're talking about, and that's in 38750, and it's subdivision E2. That's the section that speaks about if we get an application for a vehicle that's completely capable of driving without an operator, that application cannot be approved for an 180-day period. And the problem with that, there's nothing that we can do in a regulation to change the timeframes that are set forth in statute.
And I completely appreciate that. But you do have the ability to specify whether or not a completely new application has to be required. And that's what we're asking for you to consider. And I'd also say, with regard to that, that's an amazing 180-day period after all the testing's been done and delivered. I'm not clear on why that is. I know laws can be changed, and hopefully the California Assembly would consider that. So, second topic. In its present form, 227.64B substantially slows the advancement of AV technology. That 180-day requirement is quite a delay in itself. So, for vehicles that have already been through the approval process, amendments could be allowed without the delays inherent in a complete new application for public deployment. The process of requiring 180 days obviously is an economic factor as well as a safety factor. So manufacturers could be allowed the alternative of amending their application by submitting their own internal testing results to verify the safety of those changes, along with appropriate fees and their written acceptance of liability for the proper operation of their vehicles. And I know that Google and Volvo and Mercedes have all said, if this car is operating and it's operating under our software, we have liability. And I believe that liability is a result of U.S. consumer protection laws. Having to go through an extensive new public deployment application requiring a full third-party certification would unnecessarily add months, half a year, of delay in delivering the benefits to consumers of a fairly continuously and rapidly evolving technology. And what could be done is DMV could basically add to that language that if they're in any way not satisfied with the manufacturer's testing process or the results, that they could, at their discretion, require either additional tests or, in more serious cases, require a complete new public deployment application with third-party testing. And DMV, of course, would be doing this in conjunction with their outside consultants, independent consultants. And we will look at providing specific language that might help with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, John Eula. Thank you for inviting me to your competence hearing. But sorry, DMV is not qualified to handle this decision. DMV lacks the ethics department to do this. There's no aspect of that. You're simply rolling out regulations. My perspective is informed by being a former driving instructor. You asked for expertise. A former driving instructor in the state of Illinois and Chicago area, current member of a transit group, Southern California Transit Advocates in Southern California. And I was a former business flyer as a passenger, not a pilot on a private plane for a couple of years out of Roseville. The state needs to build and fund operations funding for transit, a far better solution to our surface mobility needs than autonomous driving. While I deeply sympathize with the many who've been here before me in dealing with the onerous restrictions on their personal lives by dial-a-ride services, more rail and exurban bus travel is a far better solution for these needs. Who pays for an accident in an autonomous vehicle? An accident that hurts the people in the car, an accident caused or hurting people by pedestrians or bicyclists outside the car, or vice versa. Autonomous cars are, if automobiles are lethal weapons, drones on rubber tires, and the difference being very little for those who are the collateral damage for such accidents. If we're told autonomous vehicles may be owned by anonymous corporations in the future, if they drive themselves in for servicing, this is even more trips spending fuel and energy with even fewer people on board than are today, which is a problem of great congestion on our highways. How well will sensors differentiate at night, say, between a rock, a ball, a child chasing the ball, a kitten, a swirl of leaves? How will autonomous cars avoid a multi-car pileup because of a similar assumption in every vehicle, or misassumption in every vehicle? Or rude crowding, as alluded to earlier, in on-ramps through red lights by human operators? How will they deal with drunk driving? If all vehicles were autonomous vehicles, it would be a different arrangement than this interface between the two. And I don't see, in the many pages which you issued today, I don't see a lot of human error-induced difficulties that autonomous vehicles would be forced to deal with, and how this would be handled and tested. In some cases, we may not want the vehicle to come to a stop in an earthquake or fire that takes down communication towers. If there's a forest fire, it might be more sensible to accelerate out of the area, or a downed tree limb, or a falling hill from a mudslide. I can't carry on a cell phone conversation in some parts of Malibu, in many places in the coastal mountains, and yet a disruption of perhaps as few as 2 seconds could be lethal on the steep hills and sharp turns where reception back to the satellite might be very sketchy. And I should put this point in I was going to put it at the end, but it seems appropriate. An earlier speaker talked about flying, made a comparison of flying and using instruments to fly an aircraft as being something similar to autonomous cars. However, flying in the air is not the same as autonomous cars. Airspace has infinitely more capacity, and where a lapse of a very long time is not a problem. Charles Lindbergh fell asleep. There wasn't much air traffic when he crossed the Atlantic, but a lapse of a couple of seconds again on the road could be fatal. And there's not much interference with radio signals up in the air as opposed to the canyons in Malibu. How does it end? Automobile manufacturers crash their cars. They test their cars, many of their components, till they wear out, till they die. We have not required any of the manufacturers to test any of these components to an end-of-life scenario where they're no longer viable. If a human person, eyesight fails them, we don't allow them to continue to drive. If their synapses are inadequate to respond to an accident in time, they don't pass the driving test and go on to the next step. And yet, what standards do we have in place? What tests do we have in this rollout that would prevent a failing component in part of the time, not all of the time, to cause an accident that would be very difficult to detect in the future? And then the other problem with transit, as I see, is that autonomous vehicles could devastate transit. And it's interesting that attempts were not made to try to make autonomous transit first rather than autonomous private automobiles first. But management could in the future decide to get rid of, in the case of dial-a-ride, get rid of the driver entirely, which these are $20 rides commonly per ride, which they have to apply days in advance, and depending on the agency, where the driver of buses and trains may become obsolete and gotten rid of. What about in trucking? Would this not also apply to, if it doesn't now, would it be, if it's regarded as a success, would it be applied to trucking in the future, impacting employment in the state of California, as labor is the most expensive part of a transit ride or trucking? That's pretty much it. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, for the public to address you, and in the way, unlike MTA, we're only limited to 60 seconds to speak out our points in some detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Do we have any other speakers who'd like to come forward on the subject matter of vehicle safety certifications? If not, I'm going to move on to our next topic on the agenda, which is the vehicle deployment, the provision, the section that deals with provisional deployment permit term, manufacturer operated or a lease option, and the last heading under that is reports regarding performance, safety, and usage. If there's anybody that wants to be heard on any of those topics, I'd offer the microphone at this time. Don't be shy. Come on, you guys are not that shy.
All right.
Welcome back.
Thanks so much. Do I need the spiel? Okay, good. I'm all set. So, first, I do want to make a couple comments on the issue of transit that was brought up. There already are efforts to get autonomous buses in place. The UK has really led on a lot of this stuff. Singapore is certainly leading on this. So there really are a lot of efforts already in transit. I'm actually involved with a project for Centennial in Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver, to using TNCs like Lyft or Uber, basically to model the idea of being able to bring passengers from a larger radius around existing light rail stations in at a very low cost, and to understand how that's going to impact light rail transit. It certainly has a great opportunity to work together in a coordinated system to really build our use of transit. But transit where it is most effective and where it can have the greatest impact on our communities and our congestion that we suffer so much from. So, off that soapbox, I would also add that there were a couple of questions that we hope to have some clarification on, and one is that there's a 3-year provisional permit, or is that all right to ask the question now? Will there be a provision for extending that permit if those vehicles appear to be performing well without another application process and the long delays associated with that?
I think that's part of the details that we want to work out for the formal rulemaking. Included in that is some of the suggestions that we heard this morning about, what about a completely driverless vehicle? What are you contemplating for that? I think that's one of those things that we have to take a look at when we want to put out our formal proposal.
Great. Happy to hear that. Obviously, in a 3-year period, it is very difficult for manufacturers to adequately understand the impacts and usage patterns and all the things related to that.
Right, and one of the things that we were thinking about is with a 3-year provisional period, up to this time, the technology's only been tested by someone that works for the company. Right. And so, if you can put it out for a provisional period of time where it's in real-world conditions being driven by real-world drivers, we may get a different look at how the technology is performing, as opposed to having that, trained, went through the 12-step process with the manufacturer. So.
Sure, certainly. Hopefully, if there are drivers or operators, they're going to go through that 12-step process too. There is a little concern there, if someone leases a car and they have that car, does everyone who's going to drive it, they need to be through that training too. So it's like if your teenage son asks to borrow the car, he's not borrowing the car. So things like that affect the marketability of the product compared to a personally owned conventional vehicle. I don't know the answer to that, but I did want to express that concern.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to mention one other thing, and it starts once again with a question, but under the proposed regulations, would it be possible for transit network service providers like Uber and Lyft to be able to use these vehicles?
We haven't put any prohibitions in the regulations, so it's really generally the public deployment, and so we haven't made any restrictions on something like that in the regulations.
My concern there is a regulation refers to ownership or leases to the general public. So would a TNC be considered general public? I tried to find a good legal definition and it was a little fuzzy. If it is your intent to allow them to participate in the process, and I think it's very important to understand the value of that and the value it might bring, it would be useful to be able to spell it out specifically. The leverage of a shared economy, in particular an autonomous vehicle service delivery, provides or I should say it could serve the needs of 7 to 10 low-income people or disabled people or seniors that are really in need of mobility. So getting that shared economy element into it dramatically changes the economics and the cost to all of those communities of interest and some of the people that would benefit the most from it. So hopefully in the provisions of 22268A, there would, or rather 22268C, there'd be some expansion in the or clarity in the ownership structures for those. And we're happy to provide.
Excellent, thank you.
Did you have any issue with the lease option?
I actually do. You know, I heard the person from Tesla suggested buyback as an alternative to that. I haven't thought that through, and certainly I'm not representing SAFE in saying this, but I think it's worthy of consideration. It's an interesting idea as an alternative, because there are people that are going to want to own these and aren't going to want to have to give them up after 3 years once they've really gotten to where perhaps they love them. We'll see.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Is there anyone else that wishes to be heard about vehicle deployment?
Thank you very much. I'm Itabidan from Securing America's Future Energy. So I just wanted to add a few points to the points that so eloquently made, and they're mostly about Section 227.68, the conditions related to the provisional deployment.
The first is the period of 3 years, and I understand that that 3 years is a substantial chunk of time to assess the performance of vehicles in real world conditions. On the other hand, there may be concerns that this period casts uncertainty as to the viability of a company that wishes to make an investment and deploy vehicles in the real world conditions for 3 years. Is 3 years enough? It may cause them to think that 3 years may not be enough to recoup their initial investment in terms of whatever revenue model they would like to put in place. So we'd like to give some thought to that. The length of 3 years. Is 3 years something that's very set in stone, or is that picked for a reason, or is
do you have a suggestion?
We'll get back to you on that.
Thanks.
Okay. And secondly, I think provision B touches the idea that the manufacturers should be the ones who are the ones interfacing with the general public. And my personal concern with that is that that's not the way the auto industry has been structured in the United States for the better part of a century. For a century, we've actually removed manufacturers from interfacing with the general public. The manufacturers are insulated from the general public by a network of dealerships, and this regulation may put the manufacturers the role in the ones that have the direct touch point with consumers, and that may not be the competencies that they have traditionally excelled in. Those may not be the competencies that they would wish to develop, or the business models that they would like to deploy vehicles through. But and not. I don't think we wouldn't want to restrict the manufacturer's ability to deploy vehicles to the general public if they could do so in accordance with state dealership laws across the country. But we would want to make sure that those provisions did not restrict business models such as transportation network service providers like Uber and Lyft purchasing vehicles and deploying them to the public, or rental car companies or dealership points or basically service points who entities which are typically used to dealing directly, selling cars or transportation services directly to the public. It's possible that these provisions may restrict certain business models which would otherwise naturally occur.
Are you at all concerned that going on that level, it seems to be creating responsibilities in the dealer network for being involved in the areas of safety with respect to the vehicles? You know, are you at all concerned that instead of the manufacturer having to have these responsibilities, you're now adding an intermediary that may have to take on some of those responsibilities?
I don't want to comment about how product liability would work in the case of an autonomous vehicle, but
no, I only raise it because last week, we had heard some comments from some representatives of the dealer networks, and they're concerned that new responsibilities being placed on them as we deploy these regulations. So you see, there's a fine balance where you're concerned about the manufacturers not necessarily having that relationship. The people with that relationship are concerned about new responsibilities being placed on them. So I just want to, if you had some suggestions along with the comment, we'd really like to see those.
Sure. I think the general shift, the advent of autonomous vehicles brings a shift from potential individual liability, which has been the dominant paradigm in the auto industry, where the responsibility rests with the driver, except in the case of a gross product defect. And now we're shifting it towards product liability in all cases and circumstances. So clearly, that would be most simplified if the manufacturers were the only ones who are directly interacting with the general public, and this becomes more complex. than if you add intermediaries such as which have more direct access to the consumer, or service intermediaries between the public and the manufacturers. However, I think that needs to be balanced with the ability to the autonomous vehicles are going to be a tool to provide great benefit to the public, and there's going to be a need for entrepreneurs to be in those intermediary positions to offer those services. So we need to make sure that that balance is kept, that there's clear lines of liability, and there's insurance measures in place, whether surety bonds or insurance policies, but and that ultimately liability resides with someone who is capable of covering losses. But on the other hand, we have to make while that has to happen, we also need to. We need to make sure that business models that can provide money to benefit are not restricted by a specific deployment model. And I think the general principles which we're going to, with which we'd like to approach it, is something that doesn't thrust a particular player in the broader ecosystem into a dominant role. And there's concern that this may thrust manufacturers into a role they may not want, or maybe manufacturers into a role that overemphasize their importance relative to the vehicle stock, that even more so than they have today. So we look forward to getting back to you on this.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I mean, on the issue of the viability of the company, I just want to understand what you were referring to. Were you trying to say that there may be some companies that would not be viable if they were forced to go through a provisional deployment for 3 years?
I think this is the earlier comment as to whether 3 years is too short a period. I think anyone who wants to, any manufacturer or entity which wishes to deploy autonomous cars to the general public is likely to do that under the context of investment which they'd like to recoup or earn some returns on, and that commercial viability is directly related to the availability of technology. So I think we would want to look into whether a 3-year provisional limit places uncertainty as to the long-term viability of an investment in a technology that faces significant regulatory risk 3 years down the road.
Okay. So are you thinking of that with respect to like startups getting into the field of this, or because traditionally what we've been dealing with are very large organizations that are out there, OEMs, companies like Google, that have a long track record in vehicles, and so. When looking at that and hearing you saying, well, are you concerned about the viability of the company with such a short provisional period? That's why we're kind of puzzled by the comment.
Well, I think maybe let's say we weren't talking about autonomous cars. Let's say you would put a provision in place that a new model of vehicles was subject to a provisional permit, and it could be that at the purview of the California DMV, the California government, that vehicle would have to be removed from the roads after 3 years. You could see a company choosing not to develop that type of vehicle. Let's say, we made a provision that certain subcompact cars that were subject to essentially DMV recall after 3 years. We could see a reluctance of manufacturers to invest in development of that platform or technology.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on that subject? Okay, well, the next section of our outline deals with privacy and cybersecurity requirements. One of the requirements that we have in the regulations is a written disclosure of the data that's being collected by the vehicle and what information needs to be provided to the operator with respect to that. Is there anyone that wishes to be heard about the privacy and or the cybersecurity requirements that are in the regulations? You got to make sure you're talking to the microphone.
Of course, good point. Jonathan Handel again. So this is disclosure to the operator, which is defined as the person who possesses the proper license for the type of vehicle, has direct control over the vehicle, and has engaged the autonomous technology while sitting in the driver's seat. you may, that works in a model where a given person is either owns the autonomous vehicle themselves or is renting it in a traditional rent-a-car. I go to Avis or whatever and I rent an autonomous vehicle this time. I'm not sure that definition is quite the right thing, though, in a transportation network company context, because there, the person who's concerned with their data, such as trip data, being being marketed or being used in some way, may be the customer of the TNC, the passenger, and if you're requiring, as you do, that there be a licensed driver behind the behind the wheel, that licensed driver may be the employee or independent contractor of the TNC. So I think perhaps a little bit of and I guess sub B here is that you've got to obtain the written approval of the manufacturer shall obtain the written approval of the operator of the AV to collect any information that is not necessary for the safe operation of the vehicle. There again, you would want consent, I think, from in some kind of way from the actual customer of the TNC or taxi company or other indirect.
What do they do now?
Well, right now,
I mean, for example, if you took an Uber ride and it dropped you off at McDonald's, and Uber knows that their driver dropped you off at McDonald's, and say Uber knows that.
Yeah, but I have a direct relation. I'm sorry.
But and the continuation of that is, Uber knows that it dropped 50 people off at McDonald's today, and so then they can start having McDonald's put posters on the side of their cars. I don't know. But what do those companies do with that type of information now?
Well, Uber right now does know if I get in an Uber that they drop me off at McDonald's, and in fact not just in aggregate that it's 50 people. They can target the advertising to me. However, Ford, General Motors, that made the Uber vehicle that I rode in, does not know. And if I get in an AV operated by Uber that was made by General Motors can be collecting data, and I don't have any end user agreement between me, the passenger, and GM.
But in the business model with Uber right now, it's somebody's private vehicle, right?
Uber,
right. Okay, so they would have the agreement from the owner, operator, driver of that vehicle about the collection of the data. Would it be, are you suggesting that another step would be that if the vehicles are being used for a transportation network company purpose, that they would have to get some consent from the passengers with respect to the use of the data that the vehicle's collecting?
Realistically, that would probably be the way it would have to happen. In other words, there's a flow through, because right now you're saying the manufacturer has to get the operator's permission. The thing is that the manufacturer, now you've got, the difference is that right now, when I get in an Uber vehicle, GM is not collecting any data, not to pick on GM excessively, but GM is not collecting any data on that ride. But in an AV context, because of the possibility, perhaps enhanced likelihood of data collection, the greater involvement of the manufacturer in each trip, GM could well be collecting information on that ride. Now, they wouldn't, in the barest instance, they wouldn't know that it was Jonathan Handel that took that ride. Uber would know that, and that's governed by the privacy policies that I've entered into with Uber when I clicked OK on the app. But there's nothing to stop GM from, in fact, there's every likelihood that GM would recognize the value of the data and try to coordinate with the TNC and say, hey, Uber, we'll sell you our AVs at a slightly lower price, in return for which we want you to coordinate. And when we have a ride that's on a GM AV, we want to know some demographics or even the name and email address of the of the rider of that. So there is a flow through issue or third level issue that I think should be addressed.
Okay, great. Well, you look forward to seeing your suggestion on how we handle that.
Sure. And a one-sentence supplement to my earlier comments also on the subject of licensed drivers behind the wheel. I'm perhaps maybe surprisingly inclined to agree with, I think the position Google and a number of the OEMs have, that it's not realistic to expect situational awareness to be recovered by a human in what by definition is a complex situation that was too hard for the car to deal with. And so I don't view that requirement as really offsetting the safety concerns that I raised in my earlier comments. I think it's a Band-Aid that doesn't have much force to it for the reasons that Google and others have said.
What do we do when a car gets in a situation that its sensors can't operate? What would be the suggestion?
It's very, very hard to give you a concrete suggestion. Now you have a legislative commandment that the car come to a stop as safely as quickly as possible or something, whatever the exact language was. But of course, that's not always really the right answer, because you're in the middle of traffic lanes, you're on a bridge, you're in a tunnel, you're in the middle of a hailstorm or a fire or who knows what. The real answer goes back to doing everything reasonably possible to make these vehicles safe, because you really are putting your life in the vehicle's hands. And I don't think that you can expect that, as I say, that people are going to regain situational awareness, because the vehicles aren't going to be out there until they can handle most situations mostly well. I grant that. The manufacturers, say that. And it's sort of evident. I mean, you're not by and large going to have, you can buy cheap window shades and expensive window shades, and the cheap ones don't perform so well, and people just deal with that. You're not going to have AVs out there that are sort of, cheap crap window shades that don't really work terribly well, but they are a lot cheaper. You're going to have products that mostly work mostly well. So when they encounter situations, either because of software bugs or complex environments that they can't handle, those are going to be situations that are going to be hard for a person to regain awareness, because you're going to be reading, you're going to be texting, you're going to be doing something else. The real answer is that when that happens, you're likely to have an accident. You may well have an injury. You may have death. These cars are going to kill people. The hope is that they're going to kill, and probably the likelihood is that they're going to kill a heck of a lot fewer people than our current technology, which is human drivers, do.
See, that's our worry. What we worried about, and you mentioned mostly work, mostly well.
Right.
We're worried about when it doesn't mostly work or mostly well. And
so am I.
We're doing as much as we possibly can to make sure that it's not just mostly work, mostly well. It's generally all the time very well.
Right, and I agree with that. But the reality that's hard to admit on the record for the permanence of YouTube is that they aren't going to work all the time perfectly, and people are going to die as a result of new causalities, namely automated vehicles that are not dying now. Automated vehicles have not killed anyone yet. They will. But right now, a lot of human drivers are killing a lot of people for a lot of reasons, drunkenness and distraction and all the rest. And automated vehicles are going to reduce that dramatically. The goal is to, obviously, and you've talked about, Brian, the need for calibration. And it is very much an exercise in calibration. As I said earlier, my feeling is that the balance should be struck slightly differently when it comes to certification in order to address exactly the concern that you're raising. You can't resolve that concern by saying, we'll turn it back over to the human driver. You can resolve that concern by saying, we are going to ratchet up the regime when it comes to safety requirements and certification, so that rather than 6 sigma, it's 7 sigma, or whatever measurement you want, rather than mostly and almost always, it's virtually always. Make your choice of adjectives. But that to me is the pathway towards the goal that I think we all share.
Excellent. We look forward to seeing those suggestions.
Great.
Anyone else that would like to be heard, please come forward.
Joseph DeWolf Sandoval again from the California App-Based Drivers Association. I once again read the regulations over lunch, and I was very struck with the gentleman who spoke just directly before me regarding this question as to what are we going to do with the transportation network companies, Uber, Lyft, and whatever follows. And in reviewing the regulations as drafted, it seems to me that, again, they've been drafted for the individual driver, the mom and the pup that wants to buy this car and to drive it, and not necessarily to these transportation network companies that are going to be bringing thousands of these cars into the market. Right now in Los Angeles, there are 40,000 Uber drivers, probably about 20,000 Lyft drivers. In the United States, the last record that we've been given by Uber was roughly about 200,000 drivers. And you would imagine that they're going to be replacing these drivers with autonomous vehicles to the tune of 100 or 200,000 cars out there. And again, like I said earlier this morning, this is something that is potentially really driving this shift to autonomous vehicles. And the regulations as drafted, they don't clearly address these issues that are going to come up naturally in the TNC setting regarding privacy, regarding who owns this information, regarding who's collecting this information. Is it Tesla or GM, which, as you know, has invested $500 million into Lyft to put autonomous vehicles in the streets? Who is the operator? Who is the owner? How is this going to work in a real world setting of ride sharing, the sharing economy, and livery services? And it's not just Uber and Lyft that my association is concerned with. We also represent taxi drivers that use smartphone-based applications within their livery service. So how is this going to be rolled out with respect to the taxi services, bus services, and whatnot? I do really hope, and my association hopes as well, that as you're drafting these regulations, you try to cut out exceptions or try to clarify the role that the TNCs are going to be playing in this in the future. Thank you.
And again, as I mentioned with the comments, we look forward to any suggestions that you have with respect to that.
Thank you.
You're probably going to have to twist that up a little bit. So
Yeah, I'll try and move it a little bit here.
There we are.
There you go.
So people can hear me. Once again, I'm Peter Shannon with the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force for Securing America's Future Energy. And in my full-time capacity, I'm a partner at Firelight Capital in Palo Alto. One of the things I wanted to ask you about for clarity on the information privacy question was you have two parts. One is that the manufacturer shall provide disclosure, and the other is that the manufacturer shall obtain written approval from the customer in order to collect data that's not directly related to the safe driving. I think it's worth flagging in these regulations, since we touch on it, whether that approval is conditional on the purchase of the vehicle or the use of the vehicle, or whether it stands exclusive from that.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, no, I don't. It's something that's worthy of a lot more thought, and there's a lot of precedent in other spaces as well. And quite frankly, it's a complex topic that we would have to think through quite a bit. But I think that since we touch on it here, we kind of need to finish the job and round it off. And I think that spelling that out is something that should find its way into the regulations. But it does start to extend beyond the scope of what we're trying to do in some dimension.
I just got a signal from the back that a lot of the folks back there could not hear what you were saying. So if you wouldn't mind repeating the gist of what you just mentioned, so they could understand where we're going with it.
Sure. Apologies. I guess if I almost talk right into this, I can be heard. In response to your question about whether I have an opinion on whether these regulations should tie the privacy to the use of the vehicle or not, and specify that, no, I don't have an opinion on that. I believe that this is a much more complex topic that requires a lot more thought and discussion, and that there are precedents in other industries that will help find the balance here. But since we're touching on it in these regulations, I think it's worthy of arriving at some sort of a position on it to the degree that it's within the scope of this set of regulations.
Thank you.
Okay. In one other area, if you don't mind us going back a little bit, I noticed in the testing requirements that the testing would be performed in a variety of different seasons in the state of California, and I wanted to flag the amount of time that might involve in completing all of that testing for each iteration of the vehicle, just given the way those requirements are spelled out.
And are you saying that the amount of time is correlated to the fact that the testing needs to be done in California?
Yes, that combined with needing to do it in all of these different seasons and weather conditions. However, superseding flagging that notion, I think Jonathan Handel made some excellent observations on the realities of what is achievable with that type of performance testing, that demonstration testing. And to sort of put a fine point on it, that type of testing might demonstrate that the system can perform, but only under the conditions in the test. And the conditions in the test are very limited compared to what the vehicle will encounter in the real world. And so as we approach how we properly assess the robustness of these systems in order to be certifiable, there may be other approaches that we need to incorporate into how we go about making this assessment. And for robustness testing, some element of back testing the system against literally, thousands or millions of situations that the system has seen in the past in computer simulation is one area of potential exploration. However, the difficulty there is that each manufacturer's system is going to have its own inputs and it's going to have its own test data. And a lot of that will be proprietary. And disclosing that in full has competitive implications. So it brings up some complexities for us. And at this early stage in the industry, when each system is its own design without necessarily being similar or conforming to standards at those levels, we run into a complex situation, yet nevertheless it's part of the problem we're trying to solve.
Welcome to our world.
Then I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask if it's time. Yeah, if it's timely, about two topics that weren't addressed in the regs, just briefly. One is ethics. So, a number of commentators in various published articles, including myself, have raised the issue of the cars occasionally needing to make what, for want of a better word, is termed ethical decisions. The car realizes that it's not going to be able to avoid an accident, but should it leave lane and veer into another vehicle rather than hit the unprotected pedestrian, for example. Those kinds of decisions that human drivers are essentially privileged to make, permitted to make reasonable decisions in the road, and we accept the fact that people with limited time and limited capabilities make split-second decisions. But these vehicles, the decisions will be pre-made by programmers. The regs don't address any either, and I'm not advocating a particular set of decisions to be made, but the regs don't address any particular process for making those decisions. Right now, the manufacturers are free to do what they want. A random programmer, drinking Red Bull can make a decision. A team can make a decision. The manufacturer can set up an advisory panel, including ethicists and former DMV heads or whatever, state police officers. They can do what they want. Is it within the scope of your brief, as imposed by the legislation, to include some kind of discussion of ethical process?
Well, we look forward to seeing your suggestions and the comments that you submit on that subject.
Well, I will, but is it in fact something you would have the power to potentially do within the scope of the legislation?
What the statute requires is certifications with respect to the safety of operating the vehicles.
Okay, so if ethics is viewed as a component of safety, then that may well give you that. The other thing I would raise, and this is not an issue, I guess, when you've got a driver in a vehicle, so it cuts in the other direction from my comments a moment ago, but is the issue of weaponization. When these vehicles are allowed at some point to be driverless, I don't quite see what, and no one seems to have told me, what stops you from, packing the vehicle full of C4 and sending it off to, your favorite target. It becomes a tool for a terrorist, a criminal, an aggrieved, whatever. And if you stick to your position that a licensed driver has to be in the vehicle, then we're no worse off or in any different position than we are today. It's a suicide bomb. But if you do what it has been urged by Google and others and change that portion of the draft regs and remove that requirement, then it seems to me it becomes a safety issue that has not been addressed, of course, in the draft regs.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Is there anyone else? Okay, so that basically runs us through our entire agenda. And the next subject would be closing remarks and our next steps. And as I said at the outset, what happens from here is, oh, I'm sorry, Kaushik, you had why don't you come on up?
Kaushik Raghu from Volkswagen Group. Under the other items in draft regulations.
Kaushik, make sure you speak into the mic because the folks back there can't hear you.
Sure, thank you. The one thing that I was not sure if anyone hit on today throughout this discussion was an area of operation called maybe parking or a parking structure or a parking area. Not sure if you've considered that explicitly, but given California, given Los Angeles and San Francisco where I live, parking is a huge problem. And there is a lot of opportunity for innovations to ease that situation. People in megacities, people spend a lot of time just looking for parking. And we want to make sure that these regulations don't prevent innovations in that area. So we would just like to point out that perhaps that's something that can be in your consideration, that there are possibilities in the parking, in the, I think you call it areas of operation, and you've listed 2 or 3. Perhaps there is one in the future called parking area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I start that final phase, is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay, so as I was mentioning, our next steps is we've received a lot of information at these last 2 workshop sessions, and we have a little bit of work left to do. I would encourage people who want to submit written comments to us. It would really assist us in the process of getting something out, sooner as opposed to later. If you could submit those written comments to us within the next 2 weeks, and that way we could get them quickly and start evaluating them and plotting the next steps. That next big step is that you would see a formal regulatory proposal with a statement of reasons and a notice of hearing, and that would lay out what we are indeed proposing that the regulations would look like. When that occurs, everyone that is on our mailing list, and if you weren't already on our list, your name being in our sign-in sheets today would put you on our list. You will receive a copy of that notification, and what that would do is open up a 45-day comment period to submit written comments to us. Typically, at the close of the written comment period, we schedule a formal hearing on the regulations to receive oral comments on what the proposal is. And so that is our next big step. We at sometime in the coming months, we would submit or publish a 45-day notice, request your comments on it, and then move forward with the formal rulemaking process. I will point out, as I mentioned in my introductory comments, this session is as a workshop. It's not a substitute for actually participation in that formal rulemaking proceeding. And so once that comes out, any comments that you want to have on the proposal, you would make at that point in time. We really appreciate all of the input that we received today. It's great to sit up here and look out and see how many people are in the room and are interested in this subject and seeing, the fostering of the technology. One of our biggest goals has been, as is stated in some of the uncodified language of the statute, is to see the development of the technology in California and see the use of the technology. We recognize the safety case, the 32,000 lives every year, the mobility case. We're all getting a little bit older. We've heard from the disabled community, and so there's a lot of promise with the technology. The environmental case, if cars can platoon and can travel closer together. The space case, we just heard about parking. If parking spaces didn't have to be so wide because the door is open, and urban planning, all of those wonderful benefits that the technology promises. And those are all the benefits that excite us and excite the department about working about this and on this. And we want to see it happen, but we want to see it happen safely. And you are a big part of us getting that mission accomplished. And so we really appreciate your being here today. And with that, I'm going to close out the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you all.